You teach Science is Weird?
Yeah, I'm the founder of a company called Science is Weird. We started at the very beginning of the pandemic, and where I just started doing things that I was doing in the classroom already, and then it really took off, and and I've been very excited about that. But because of that, I've had to move everything just this sort of steady upgrading of what my recording technology is.
So when you say you have moving blankets up all over, like, I'm assuming they're not physically moving. Are they got moving pictures on them, or what do you mean?
No, sorry, so adjective, not not participle, gerund. Yeah, no, just like the kind of blankets that you purchase for cheap from a Home Depot store or whatever in order to,
All right. See, I just read a very moving post about education last night, so my head is in a totally different context.
I did too. Okay, so can I just give a little bit of backstory of like me and the two of you for a second?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Stephen, I'm really interested in knowing what your drone vision of the future is. Because, I did my requisite Google snooping of the both of you after, a year of listening avidly to your podcast. But I realized I don't really know who these people are. Stephen, but you are basically a cipher online. This is very difficult to find out anything about you.
Thank goodness. I share a name with a famous soccer player, so.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Eneash, what was I talking? What was it that provoked me? Oh, I was talking about your writing and your work. No, it was.
Oh, okay.
My kids and I have spent a good long time listening to Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality, and I never put together the fact that you were you. I was so excited yesterday.
Oh my God! Okay. I'm very happy to hear that.
How the heck did you get Zoe Chase to be on that podcast?
Dude, it is the coolest thing in the world. I don't know. I was just in my phase of saying yes to everything and trying lots of things. And I fucking love her voice. I have such a crush on her voice. And so I was just like, I randomly wrote into a few people. I got fucking Dan Carlin of Hardcore History to do a voice just by writing in and be like, hey, I got a Harry Potter fan cast. Can you do a voice? He's like, yeah, sure. I love Harry Potter. Anyways, I just did the same thing. I found Zoe Chase's email at NPR. And I was like, hey, Zoe Chase, I'm a huge fan. I love you on Planet Money. All my nerd friends would be like so in awe of me if I could get your voice just for a few lines here on this podcast of mine. And Zoe was like, yeah, sure, no problem. And she had access to the NPR studios with all the foam on the walls and these $1,000 microphones. It sounded so good. And I was like, oh my God. So yeah, I just asked.
I gotta say, my entire image of rationalism, of how I consider myself a rationalist, which is to say that I'm not really sure if I'm a rationalist or not, which is true, I think, of all of the rationalists. I say this from inside the camp, but I feel like my understanding of how mainstream rationalism had gone was changed when I heard Zoe Chase's voice on your podcast, which now maybe I need to rescind that. I need to update on that belief. No, actually, you were just selling yourself out to anybody with an email account. But you should know that that was actually kind of a big moment for me.
Oh, neat. Yeah, I was just, not anyone with an email account, but, people that I listened to and admired. I was like, I love their podcast. I would love to get their voice on my podcast. And I tried. I do think it's definitely gotten a lot more mainstream than before. I hear a lot now in podcasts, people talking about Steel Manning or Mountain-Baileying and various things that, obviously Mountain-Baileying didn't originate in the rationalist sphere, but it was popularized there. And Steel Manning just literally straight up invented quite a few terms that were coined by Yudkowsky, just show up everywhere now. And that's pretty awesome.
I hear people say carve reality at the joints and Moloch and, all the important map and territory business. I hear people that never talk about rationality use map and territory. Yeah, it's great.
Well, but the map is not the territory as Kobyitsky. I can't. Eneash, you can maybe pronounce that name. The major.
I cannot.
Okay. All right. Sorry.
Yeah, no, Yudkowsky didn't invent it, but I think he popularized it. But you're right. Some people definitely came to it from elsewhere.
And there's more than one things that were literally coined in the rational sphere, oftentimes by Yudkowsky himself, that are popular now. Everybody knows about the paperclip maximizer. Everybody uses Steel Man. It's just out there. There's podcasts that I'm sure have never touch the rational sphere that talk about Steel Manning things.
Eneash, before we actually get started, perhaps we are started right now, but you must be aware of this, that your name you are literally named after the first fan fiction character.
Aeneas from the Ennead.
Yes.
Yes. I hadn't thought of it as fan fiction before, but you're right. I mean, all mythology is fan fiction, though, so it wasn't like the first one. But you're right. It was the first one that was an explicit ripoff of something else.
Yes, right. This little minor character, like who you probably kind of missed, right? But he's important because Poseidon saved him at one point or something like that from something. I don't know. It's been too long, and I've never read the Aeneid. But here's his story. I'd heard the Aeneid once upon a time referred to as the first fan fiction, and then when I learned the etymology of your name, I'm like, oh my gosh, he's gonna love this if he doesn't know it already.
Yeah. It's pronounced the Aeneid?
I mean, that's how it was pronounced to me in my memory. So absolutely.
Okay. That's what I'm going with. I've never heard it pronounced by someone with an education before. So, or at least not before I had tainted them by mispronouncing it in front of them. So cool. Yeah, I was aware my dad was a big fan of the classics. And I don't know. I don't know. I had this whole theory in my head that since he was naming me as they were planning to flee from Poland, that it was part of this whole mythical journey to flee from one land and go to another and start a new life. But then he was like, I asked him about this a few years ago. He's like, that's really cool. No, I just thought it was a cool name within the story I liked. And I'm like, I'm going to stick with mine and tell people that one.
You can invent your own mythology for it. Why not?
Exactly.
So where do you guys want to take this? I'm doing my,
hold on. Before we
go for it. Your podcast.
Before we start all that, since you asked us some things about us, we got to ask about you. How did you come into this whole rationality business?
Oh my God. I had a couple friends who had asked me if I'd ever heard of this blog called Slate Star Codex before. And the answer was no until it was yes. And I read, what's the title of it? The categories were made for man, not man for the categories. And that was like it. I still oftentimes refer people. I mean, I referred like a couple hundred kids to that and their parents, right, to that essay recently as part of the science company that I do in the curriculum that we make. Just because it was such a wonderful example of, wow, this idea, sorry for any listeners here, you guys can Google it. It's just such a basic idea of how we should be using words and categories. And it's not rocket science. It's just the simplest possible thing, of course, but nobody does it. And it's not part of like any particular scholarly discipline's domain where you're supposed to learn that. And it was just a wonderful kind of like entry into like the world of maybe there are some really important, simple ideas that, not to say that nobody's ever stumbled upon them, but like people haven't like consistently been putting them together and trying to live by them. So that was my entree into it.
Nice. I don't know. It's always fascinating finding people who, like when you first found it, I mean, when I first found Less Wrong, or I guess Overcoming Bias at the time, like it immediately grabbed me. I was like, this is a thing that has been kind of like in my mind, in my brain, lurking the whole time, but here's someone who has put it into words, and this is like absolute catnip. Did you have the same initial burst of wonder?
I think I read like all of the Slate Star Codex posts from 2014 to like 2017, one at a time as quickly as possible. So yes.
Jesus. Awesome. Yeah. Well, that is fascinating. I'm always happy to meet a new rationalist and hear how their thing is going. We are here talking to you today.
Hold on a second. I didn't get to go.
Yes.
What am I, chopped liver over here?
Stephen.
It's not that interesting, but I feel left out. I was listening to Rationally Speaking, and I can't remember how the backward trajectory is vague. My autobiographical memory is bad, to put it lightly. I know I think I was introduced to like counterculture skeptical thinking by George Carlin, and at some point found the Skeptoid podcast, and then it was Rationally Speaking. And I remember as I was in the car delivering pizzas in college, listening to Rationally Speaking. And at the end, Julia Galef and Massimo would plug like their, what's captured our rational fancy this week. And Julia mentioned Harry Potter and Methods of Rationality, this fanfic by this AI developer. And I remember I was at a stoplight and I made a note in my phone to read this and got around to it like 6 months later. And I was like, oh my God, I love this. And at the beginning of the story, it says, if you want to learn everything Harry knows and more, check out lesswrong.com. And I did. And I loved it. And like Enosh said, it was a lot like just articulating things that like, oh, of course, that makes sense. And what a great way to put it. And what's great is we go back and we're now like doing, a couple sequence posts a week or an episode. And like, it feels more intuitive now, but I know that it wasn't at the time. And so it just means that it's sunk in, which is great. And I think,
Stephen,
I was going to say, you asked about, I don't know how you found out that I worked at a drone company. Actually, I'm curious
Google.
about that.
Just go, LinkedIn, I think.
Oh, yeah. I thought that stuff was private, but anyway, yeah. So that's all right.
Brandon is a master hacker.
What the company does is we don't make drones. We don't manufacture them. We don't program them. We give drone pilots the ability to get quick authorization through the FAA to fly commercially or recreationally.
Yeah, that's what ChatGPT told me. Actually, yeah.
So that's pretty funny. We actually have a channel on our. We use Teams because that's the one bad thing about the company is we use Microsoft Teams and Outlook. But we have a channel called Future Memories, and it was my turn. We pick a random person after someone else is done. It was my turn, and I published mine on the 1-year anniversary that I had worked there, and I said it 9 years later. And don't tell my boss, but I had ChatGPT basically write the whole thing for me. But I told it about me, and it knew about the company, and I had said, "Hey, paint a picture of what this looks like down the road." That said, my actual future vision for the company is at some point Jeff Bezos is going to kick in the door and said, "I'd like to buy your product," and I have some stock in the company. So that's my actual end game future for it. I don't know how realistic drone delivery is for like large scale delivery, but for small stuff that you need quickly, it's great. Actually, if you're the least bit curious, the CEO's name is Michael Helander. He did like an 8-minute TED talk in which he summarizes the vision of the company really well. He has all of the charisma and bright, shiny teeth of a great cult leader, and he's awesome. So if this ever gets back to him, Michael, I think I mean that as a huge compliment. It's a really great place to work.
I would like to meet him. I need some cult leader training.
Man, yeah, he's great. It's like the other, not to take us too far off, but like it's interesting. Even like so, I got to meet everybody at the company and hang out with like there's only like 50 employees, but I got to go to work for a week last month. We went to Detroit, and like even when he's just talking to us, like he's still selling the product. Like it's just like it's baked into his bones now, and it's perfectly organic and natural the way that he does it. It's really cool.
Stephen, I don't know if you caught it, but your origin story makes a cameo in the real fanfic is the friends we made along the way.
I haven't finished reading it yet.
Okay.
I have the audio version, but it's not that good.
Yeah.
So I just need to sit down and actually read the thing. But that's really sweet. I can't wait. Are you kidding me? Wow, how fun.
Nope. Not kidding.
That's awesome.
Oh. I mean, it's embellished a little bit, but yeah, it's the guy sitting at a quick reference to a guy sitting at a stoplight listening to a podcast, and it has major effects on his life later.
Enosh, I'm touched. That's delightful.
Oh, the whole thing is just chock full of references to everything. It was my every other sentence must be a reference to something story.
Love it.
A lot of fun.
Then one quick question for you. So you got Zoe Chase. You got one of the guys from Skeptic's Guide to the Universe.
Yeah, Jay Novella.
Right, Jay. Because there's the other novella that I get confused with.
There's 3 novellas, in fact.
Oh, dang. You got Yukowski, Dan Carlin. Did you email anybody who said no?
I emailed a couple of people who didn't reply, which, is effectively a no, but I don't want to say who they are because that just seems kind of rude.
Oh, no, yeah. I didn't mean to I wasn't putting them down or anything. Some people are busy. They don't check their inboxes and,
yeah,
I can't say for sure.
I've had that problem myself.
Right? Yeah.
My mind scrolls back to all of the emails that I have not responded to right now.
Yeah. Oh, I have an email address which I haven't even checked in a few months, which I probably should go and check. Whoops. But yeah.
Oh, and Brandon, one question for you. So science is weird. This might be a question you can't answer, but where have I heard of that? I know that I buy
probably nowhere if you don't have kids, and if you're not a homeschooler. bigger and bigger in the sort of the secular homeschooling community. But I buy some advertising on the Astral Codex 10 podcast. So possibly that. Also, when I was announced as the winner of the book review contest, we all got to write our little bio lines. Brandon Hendrickson is the founder of Science is Weird, making an epic, sprawling science curriculum for kids ages whatever to whatever. Yeah.
The thing is, so I don't have kids, and I'm not that close with my nieces and nephew. I think I must have heard of it on a podcast, like mentioned somewhere once. Maybe it was the Clear Thinking podcast. Maybe it was.
I doubt it. Maybe that would be really cool. I doubt it. We've started small and we're lower middle size, I think, right now.
But you're doing stuff that I think people love. This is great. So. Maybe we should get started. This unorganized stuff can go out to patrons or something. But you want to roll into, then we could talk about briefly Science is Weird, then jump into the book review.
I think maybe. Well, here from you guys can do whatever you want, and I will just sit here like a fish and answer questions because that's what fish do. But I would actually suggest the book review, then Science is Weird. Rationalists.
That sounds good.
We don't have that many children. I have 3, but then I also just got an operation that means I will not have any more children. Right? We don't have that many. We don't have that many children. So I'm not trying to sell to our community here.
Well, and 3 is on the high side for rationalists. A lot of them have 1 or less.
Right. Yeah. You've gone past replacement rates, and you're planting the true seeds of rationality into kids across the world. So.
I mean, that's with the business, with the teaching, that's great, right? Like that gets me up in the morning. The idea that I have passed along my genes and then some, that just hits all of the icky notes with that eugenics hits in people. So I'll agree to one of those more than the other.
No. See, I personally, this is a crusade I plan on going on, not maybe be a crusade, but a journey I plan on going on sometime in the near future is just getting rationalists to have more children, because I've kind of been thinking we are sort of going extinct, and that's not great. Like literally just taking ourselves out of the gene pool. And I kind of feel like the opposite should be the case. We got a lot of good things to contribute.
But we can expand mimetically too. We don't have to expand genetically. So
that is true, but we should do both.
Yeah, why not? All right, let's do our actual intro so we can find a way to start the podcast. Welcome to Innovation Conspiracy. I'm Steven Zuber.
I'm Eneasz Brodsky. Brandon.
Oh, I wasn't sure. Okay, I'm not really sure what to do right now. Just keep silent. And
we really should have told you before. Okay. Brandon Henderson. We have alluded to this a couple. Sorry, Hendrick.
Yeah, sorry, I meant to cut you off. You said Henderson.
Hendrickson. Yes. We've alluded to this a couple times, but I think the reason we're here is because you are one of a very small handful of humans on the planet who has won the ACX book review contest.
Well, and
so
I don't
first of all, congrats on that.
Thank you very much. And I don't mean to gloat too much, but I'm actually the very first person to win the ACX book review contest without getting a majority of the votes.
What? Oh, was it split enough that no one person got a majority?
No, it's worse than that. It's that Scott entered the contest in his review won. So I won because he thought it was in bad taste to crown himself the winner.
I mean, he's fair. Not wrong there. Yeah.
So, congratulations. If the only person to beat you at this is Scott Alexander, I think that still puts you in a very small group of elites. So.
Yeah, it's like saying the only person who was able to outrun me was Usain Bolt. So, yeah, it's high praise still.
I mean, especially when you look at the other 2 people who have won in the past, right? Lars and Eric Hole, right? Like Eric Hole, writes like an angel speaks. It's just he's insuperable. He's it bothers me.
Unless he's writing about effective altruism.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. Here, let's not. I'm sorry, I forgot to whom I was speaking. Let me just pretend that I didn't say that on this podcast.
No. I think the guy. I think he's great. I disagree with his take on there 100%. But I called out a few weeks ago that I loved his take on the new wave of artificial intelligence. That same podcast host, what was it? Russ Roberts said that he wasn't scared until he read Eric Hole's essay on it. So right. If he's out there scaring people on this, I think he's doing the good work there.
Yeah.
And I mean, EA isn't like perfect. There's been some valid critiques from people like Zvi and others. It's
but none from Eric.
but none from Eric. There we go.
And,
All right.
And the other person who won before, if I can just move on from that, Lars, with the Georgism stuff, and really seeming to bring Georgism, Georgist economics into, I don't know if it's mainstream yet, and I really don't know how much specifically he has done. It seems to me like he's done everything. But like, my gosh, like he's out there doing really important work in economics. So the idea that I am to be included in this pantheon of three people is just like, every once in a while, it's like wake up in the morning and my brain will go, wow, do you think you're going to win the book review contest? And I go, I won it. It's very exciting.
That's awesome.
He did the Dawn of Everything. All right, cool. I'll check that out.
Reviewed Graeber's work, The Dawn of Everything. That's right. Great review too. I studied both of those reviews very much in order to write mine.
So you were flattering enough to express, I don't know how to say, being a fan without sounding super pretentious to myself and to Eneasz mostly, but
groveling adulation, I believe, is the phrase.
Well, can I just grovelingly adulate your writing ability here?
Yes,
like it was long, but I was excitedly scrolling, and the only thing that slowed me down really was that ASX's website, for some reason, takes up 500 megs of memory just to open a web text page. But holy heck, man! Like you're summarizing dense subject matter in a way that like is gripping, gives relatable examples, makes me feel like, oh my god, I totally get this, and I've totally been there. It was it's no wonder you won. It was a riveting read. I've sent it to people. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
I want to add in that the visual of these different types of knowledge that was slowly built upon and filled in as we went, like once it actually clicked to me what it was doing, it was just a wonderful aid for understanding, and I appreciated it. I had that moment of sudden comprehension grokking at like, I don't know, 4/5 the way through the picture thing.
Would it be good for me to give a nutshell of the thesis of the entire thing for your listeners who perhaps have not read this 70-page sprawling tome of a book review in the recent past?
I recommend everyone read it. However, almost not everyone will. So please, I want to talk mostly in depth about a lot of it. But yeah, give your overview, and we'll dive into it.
I think
I took like 4 pages.
Sorry, go for it.
Oh, I took like 4 pages of notes as I was reading through it, and hopefully we can touch on them as we go. But let's start out with your encapsulation or summary or whatever you'd like.
So I think the simplest way of nutshelling the thing is to say that schools, insofar as schools have been set up for academic purposes, and maybe there's a conversation about like why are schools really set up, but insofar as they are set up to teach kids the things, there is this assumption that's been made about the kind of understanding that we want kids to have, right? It's the sort of modern, scientific, erudite, rational, I don't know what other words we want to put on that, but stuff like that, sort of understanding. And we are then surprised when kids have a really hard time getting it, and most of them go through the schooling system and barely get any of it at all. And Egan's point is that, look, that kind of understanding that we want kids to have, there's a history behind that came from somewhere that has its own kind of like certain logic, right? Like the sort of like logical way of seeing the world has its own internal logic. It's not natural to people. It's not the sort of thing that can be pounded into people. If you look at where it comes from, even kind of historically, you see that like before people had this modern, rational way of looking at the world, they had these other kinds of ways of looking at the world that had a lot of commonalities. They all used stories. They all used metaphors. They all used abstract binary opposites. They all used puzzles and riddles and things of that nature. And if you really steer into those kinds of tools in the early years of education, you can get to this spot where the kids just have like knowledge that is overflowing. And they want they want some new tools to be able to make sense of this knowledge. They want to have this new understanding they want a new understanding of the world to make sense of all the things that they're learning. And this historically is seemingly where like the Greek miracle, right, that happens, like 500, 400 BCE, seems to come
from... What is the Greek miracle?
I mean, it's what we call the beginning of archaic Greece, of classical Greece. Like you have in a couple cities that are like the size of my hometown, which nobody has ever heard of before. We have in a couple of these small cities like some of the most important thinking that has ever been done in world history. And the question historically has always been, what the heck were they drinking? What was going on in these places? And one of the important insights is that they had already built up all of this knowledge. That's not unique to them, but it is a necessary piece of how you get to modern rational thought. And so Egan's idea, this took more than 30 or 45 seconds or whatever it was that I said, is that like you start with the things that kids are good at, stories and riddles and games and metaphors and whatever, songs and rhymes. And like you can quickly build up so much understanding that they then want to develop these new tools of modern rationality to get there. That
is a brilliant encapsulation. One of the first notes that I took here at the beginning is that adults tend to treat children as if they're lesser adults, that they have the same basic reasoning, they just kind of suck at it. And Egan points out that we should like try to observe kids as if we're Jane Goodalls and looking at them out in the wild and see the kind of things they gravitate to and that they do really well. And that is what their early education should all work towards, to lean into all those strengths that kids have, and they will just naturally absorb it all. What are those things that the kids are very good at? When I was in college, if you asked me, what are the classes that you're taking, Brandon, I could always say like 2/3 of them, and it was never the same 2/3. And I have the same problem with the sort of these early strengths, these early tools. So let me cheat right now and grab out the book that I modeled my picture in that book review off of, just to like skim some of these. Okay, so like the biggest one is story, but you also have, just 1 second. Okay, sorry, my computer did a weird thing. You also have things like metaphors. You have things like a sense of mystery. You have role playing, right? Kids love to role play. And like, if you know pedagogically how to like really tweak out role playing, my goodness, can you do a lot with it? I'd be happy to give examples for that. Something like a vivid mental image, right? Like you think about, I don't know, is it Kali in the Hindu tradition I'm going to get this so totally wrong. I'm going to go Western. I'm going to say Jesus on the cross, right?
I was going to say, I don't think either of us are equipped to correct you. So,
well, then that's especially dangerous. So let me know. But your listeners will be.
Most of what I know about Kali comes from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. So,
a still underrated movie because nobody likes to say anything positive about it ever.
I really like it. I think it's a good one.
Maybe I should rewatch it.
It was delightful.
I don't know why people hate it. It's as good as Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Is it really?
Kind of better in some places. I thought so. Maybe because I saw it first. And then when I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark, I was like, this is the same thing as Temple of Doom. Why is this so overrated in comparison?
I know that George Lucas watched it some years ago and said, like, man, I was really going through some hard times when I was making that movie. I think he was going through a divorce, and like that's what he gives. That's how he explains why it's so like overly violent and disturbing and whatever.
I loved overly violent and disturbing. That's exactly what I was there for.
But you're goth, so okay. You know what? That makes sense. Okay, this is fine. Okay, yeah. Agree.
Didn't need to derail you too hard, though. Jesus on the cross. Where were we?
The reason that I bring up Jesus on the cross for this is vivid mental images, right? Like there are these certain things that you just get like stuck in your head. And I don't even mean like a picture in a book, although that can happen there too, right? Like these pictures, they just get stuck in your head, and you use them. You don't just think about them, you use them to think with. Ditto metaphors, ditto stories, dittos these like abstract binary opposites. Basically like everything that Pixar uses to make a good Pixar movie and that Pixar does not use enough of to make a subpar Pixar movie, right? Like you can look at how narrative works and just say, oh, like there, it's obvious that human minds are really good at handling huge amounts of information if it's given in certain forms. And what's weird is that these are not like the simplest quote unquote forms to give that information. And you can actually like communicate a heck of a lot more information if you use like the tools that every storyteller ever has used. So the idea is not like that we should like just tell stories in classrooms. That would be stupid. Although maybe there's some good that would come into that. But we should use the tools that storytellers have used for eons to teach fractions and to teach electron orbitals and whatever.
I loved your example with the earthworm, where one was just like a listing of earthworm facts, and the other one was basically giving those same facts, but guiding kids through imagining themselves being an earthworm and wriggling in the dirt and all that. And it was just so much more evocative and interesting. And you made this point that humanity has a built-in VR system, and we're not using it. And like, I distinctly remember as a kid, sometimes just sitting on the couch or playing on the swing or something and just imagining stories and, you know, people fighting and things blowing up and daring rescue for hours, just imagining stuff in my head. And it was wonderful. And yeah, it's right there. Why aren't we using this?
One of Egan's here, can I actually just back up for a second and say, we keep using this word that is not a word, Egan. Can I just explain for a sec who Egan was?
Please.
Egan was a Irish, English, American, Canadian educational philosopher who died less than 2 years ago. He found his eventual academic home at Simon Fraser University, which is outside of Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada. And he was one of these people who's just like classically schooled, and I think his undergraduate was in was history. He has this anecdote that has really like meant a lot to me, which was he was asked after his freshman year of college, what is the most important thing that you learned this year? And he said, Anglo-Saxon law. And the person asking him said, oh no, I meant like about getting together with your room, like getting along well with your roommates, or, you know, about life or whatever. And he said, oh, I see. Anglo-Saxon law.
Yeah.
This idea that when you learn something like really well, like it's emotional, it's meaningful to you, it is vivid, right? It excites you, and that we should not draw this strict boundary between like things that are academic and things that are personal, and there's sorts of things that people do in their free time, like Eneasz sitting on a swing and pretending to blow up whole armies with bombs.
Well, usually they were lasers that came out of my arms, but yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
Right? Always go for maximum cool when you're imagining.
Natural storyteller here. I mean, and to your point, or to Egan's point, I'm gonna keep calling your points or Egan's points your points, because I think they line up. But
well, in the book review, yeah.
If I ever attribute something to you that isn't your position, correct me. But like, I was going to use the earthworm example too. Like, I'd never thought of it that way. I have thought of like locomotion of other critters. You know, like gravity isn't as important to ants as it is to us. You know, because they're small enough that fall damage isn't really a thing, and they can climb walls and stuff. And you know, like the different. Actually, the reason that I think of things like that is because I've read popular science books that talk about things that way. Like, it's disappointing that. And like I like science classes, and I think that's why I read popular science books. But it really should have been. I think it would have stuck more. I know a lot of people who didn't take to science in school, and they don't like it as adults. And it's like, man, if you just sit and just marvel at, so I'm talking about books like Richard Dawkins's Unweaving the Rainbow, where it's just, you know, the majesty and poetry of reality is awe-inspiring and breathtaking, and people reduce it down to like, well, you know, it's just light or whatever. And no, man, it's not just anything. It's so cool. And part of what makes that land is this is emphasized in your review here as well, is that like, this isn't, I think things are taught in such a way that like, and now we're going to talk about atoms. This is what stuff is made of. And what would be way more fun introduction is talking about, what did people think stuff was made of?
Yeah.
How did they figure this out? Because that actually makes it a story, makes that stick, and it turns out to be actually interesting that way, right? Bill Bryson's A Short History of Nearly Everything does that. Like, I think he opens it's been years since I've read it, but he opens talking about, like, I think is wondering how, how that he knew that the core of the earth was molten iron, but then he's thinking, how the hell do we know that? And the questions of, like, how we came to know things turn out to be such a gripping way to teach people what they what we know, but it makes it I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to emphasize the value of, like, putting a narrative behind it that makes it a story.
My conversion to science, to being interested in science, because I actually actively avoided science classes when I was in high school and college, which in retrospect was stupid, was reading Bill Bryson. My wife and I had gotten married. We were moving from Arizona to Seattle, and we got the whole 36 disc CD set of Short History of Nearly Everything, and just, like, listened to it as we were driving along the Pacific, and just, like, realizing, like, oh my gosh, like, why has this not been explained to me this way before? Dawkins actually has a quote to the effect of, maybe we don't need to just have science classes built for people who will become scientists. And, like, it'll teach you, like, how to, titrate solutions, or I'm not even pronouncing that right, I'm sure. But, balance equations, but, like, these science classes that would help expose you to the wonder of science. And, like, what I've spent the last few years doing, what I'm going to spend the rest of this decade really, like, working on, is bringing the two of those things together. Because I think even in Dawkins's quote, there's this kind of imagining that these are still kind of separate things, that you could learn, like, the technical things, and you could learn those fast and well, or you could learn the romance and the wonder and the joy of like the stories of how we figured this stuff out. I don't want to actually over-focus just on the stories, but the wonder of the world. Obviously, Dawkins in his own work does a really good job of bringing these things both together. But we can do that. we can do that, and when we do that, we find that we can go so much deeper into, like, the actual vibrant intellectual joy of real content than we were ever able to before. So, like, with Science is Weird, the company that I founded to really see how far could an Egan perspective on science take people. We've been doing it for 3 years, and recently we said, okay, like, we have, like, mostly new people, like, from compared to the very beginnings. Like, we should start over at the beginning, and we should do it slowly, and we should do it wonderfully, such that we, like, tie together everything in the universe over 6 years of courses. And, like, we're only now a couple months in, maybe 2 months in at this point. We've had, like, 8 lessons, but, like, already the kids understand electron orbitals and covalent bonds and hydrogen bonds, and, like, an actual scale of, like, they have, like, a picture in their head of, like, how large the observable universe is. And they know how, like, densely packed, like, it's not like a technical knowledge they have, like, a lived felt reality of how densely packed the universe is with galaxies and galaxies with stars. Like, what a nebula would feel like if you had God hands. We zoomed down role playing. Sorry, I mentioned Egan and role playing before. It was like a year and a half maybe into teaching, like, really serious science before I realized, okay, like, role playing, we could have this nonsense of, like, having, like, the shrink ray from Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and we could shrink kids down to, like, to be a millimeter tall. They're about a millimeter tall, and then we could shrink them down again to be a micrometer tall, and then again to a nanometer, and then to a picometer, and then to a femtometer, and then we could, like, look at all the things that we're talking about, right? Like, what do they look like at each of these scales? And, like, how can you understand better what is going on in the world if we just bring this little bit of nonsense and role playing in, which kids are really good at, to actually imagine, like, what is going on inside of an atom.
I think that's such a cool way to put it. And you mentioned Pixar at least a couple times in the book review here. And, like, I probably saw this movie when it was new. So whenever A Bug's Life came out, I remember there was a scene, at least I think I do, where one of the ants is carrying a ball of water and moving it somewhere. And that's how water works at that scale, and so it's vivid enough that it stuck with me for decades. And this is the kind of thing that I mean, man, maybe somebody should give the Pixar studio $1 billion to make science movies.
Or they can give it to Science is Weird, and they can do the science movies.
Right, and you guys can sub out, you guys can contract out some of the whatever visual art stuff to Pixar if you want. But that's a better use. You're right. Give it to Science is Weird. We have many billionaire listeners with money burning holes in their pockets. So.
Are you guys familiar with the channel Kurz? Actually, I want to go back to that Bugs Life moment, because I think there's actually something really important about science education that people miss, but that XKCD gets so right. But are you guys familiar with the channel Kurzgesagt on YouTube?
No, I'm not.
I don't think so.
Gosh. Okay. So just you guys and like all of your listeners, like KURZGES. Okay, now I've SAGT. There we go. Kurzgesagt, Kurz short, gesagt wise. This German-originated channel that does science education better than anyone has ever done it before. They're just so glorious. It's the sort of thing that like my kids are just my 10-year-old, my 13-year-old are just addicted to. Sorry, their ages just changed. 11 and 13, it's about to change again. I'm a bad dad.
It happens like every year.
Multiple
How
times
do you keep track?
Actually, it's ridiculous. They're just addicted to watching these things. And because like we homeschool our kids, and we do like, actual serious sort of like classically-ish stuff with them sometimes, we're pretty hands-off and they kind of wake up almost whenever they want and whatever. But like they can have deep conversations about advanced evolutionary theory, like at the dinner table, right? Like, to what extent should we take like the hill metaphor? What's the word for this? The hill metaphor.
Hill climbing?
Yeah. Thank you. Hill climbing metaphor. Like, to what extent should we take that seriously? Like, what do Scott Alexander pointed out recently, like, what do the X and Y variables and that chart even refer to, or is this just totally abstract? And like looking at like real animals and like imagining their evolutionary histories and their phylogenies, and like arguing about them, right? Like this is the sort of thing like you can get on YouTube now, because YouTube is, this beautifully free market thing where like the most interesting and usually most accurate science videos are the ones that get the most likes. YouTube actually has a problem of really crap science too that gets likes. But like you have in Kurzgesagt and a number of other channels. Tier Zoo is another really fantastic one. These wonderful science outfits emerging that have almost Pixar levels of quality to them. Kurzgesagt is coming out with their first VR game this month. And like, we don't own a VR system, but maybe we need to own a VR system now because everything they do is just so magical. And if I can say like, this is something that I meant to bring into the book review, and maybe I did. It was so a long time ago that I wrote it now. But like one of the signs that like Egan is onto something is that it's really difficult I think it would be very, very difficult to like look at like what are the greatest science video channels on YouTube? What are they doing right in terms of what ordinary educational philosophy, psychology, whatever says that you should be doing? What they're doing looks very little like what is going on in what is considered best methods in a ordinary science classroom. But they look exactly like what Kieran Egan says great science education should look like. Now, I would actually be very interested in getting an outsider perspective on that. It's entirely possible that I'm just too in the weeds or too in the bowl to judge that accurately.
Well, I'm definitely going to check out Kurzgesagt. I can't say it either, but we'll also link to it in the show or in the description. I like it's tangentially related, but a YouTube channel called Technology Connections. And
writing that down.
You what?
I'm writing that down.
Oh, nice. Yeah, he's fun. I mean, I watched a 45-minute video on dishwashers, and it's not so much about teaching science as it is just like, hey, like that stuff in your house that like you just use all the time. You're curious what's going on in there, or there's several videos on car headlights and CDs and CD players,
That is science, though, and especially for like young kids who just like want to play with wheels and toys and gears and figure out how it all works and just inspect that stuff for hours. That's what they're into. They, especially the things you see around your house all the time.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is very little of it is like, I can't think of one that has, you know, I don't know. Like, why do I hear that clicking noise before the heat comes on when my furnace comes on? Right? Like,
Wait, why do
now
you?
I know.
Why do you?
Gosh, I shouldn't have said now I know. So it's kicking on the burners in there, and there's a quick check to make sure that all the burners are coming on correct, like that they all come on. And if they don't come on fast enough, it shuts the whole thing down. There's like a lot of safety fallbacks in there. And so before the air starts blowing and stuff, it's got some checks in there to make sure that everything is like, you know, the fuel rate is coming out correctly and being burned correctly before it starts blowing it into your house. Because if it just started blowing right away, it would start blowing gas through instead of hot air. And then of course, if the hot air kicked on, if the flames kicked on a few seconds later, then you got yourself a nice explosion. So they're really built with safety redundancies in mind. But
So does
Is
it
the
only-
clicking the spark?
I think it's something like that. I'd have to go check. I'd have to double check. But it's one of those things that if I remembered better, I would know how they work.
Right.
But anyway, yeah,
Well-
it's just sorry. Go ahead.
Well, there's something magical about that kind of simple question that you feel like you should be able to answer, but you're not. School is full of questions, obviously, but most of the questions feel like you shouldn't be able to find out the answer. You've never wondered about the answer before. I like to think about, like, you know, I don't know, like the whole like sort of Socratic dialogue method, which I'm very, very, very much in favor of, right? Is like, it almost treats all questions. This isn't fair, I think, to it, but I'll say it anyway because it's what was in my head. It just says that questions are good. We should ask kids more questions, and then they'll have to come up with the answers, and then it'll be great. But questions can be meaningless, and questions can be uninspiring. One of the things that Egan talks about, not as much honestly as he should have, is the idea of riddles, which I define, and this is a bespoke definition of this, as a question where you really feel like you should know or be able to figure out the answer right now. Like, my favorite example of this is what is the capital of Sri Lanka, right? Like, I don't know the answer to that. That's not a riddle. What is the room in your home right behind your toilet? It
There isn't
feels
one.
like you should. So then what? What is right behind your toilet, if I can ask?
I guess there's one toilet in the house that faces to that if you punch the wall, you'd get to a closet. The other two face outside walls, and there's probably a reason for that, because that's where all the plumbing goes, right?
Yeah, both of my toilets that face an interior wall are into closets as well, closet or pantry.
Oh, ones that
But I didn't mean to ruin the riddle for you.
No. That wasn't, you didn't in any way ruin it, right? Most people don't think about their houses in 3 dimensions, right? Like, what is the room if you live in a multi-story domicile? What is the room immediately above or below me, right? Like, how would I get to this room if I shot a laser, right? Like, if I wanted to shoot like a laser into my son's room right now, like, where would I aim it? These are the sorts of things that people don't usually think about. And they require like thinking through like the bigger picture and seeing how things connect together to solve the riddle.
I have a story about that. I was, I think, 5 or 6 years old, and I don't know, I was bored. My dad didn't have time to entertain me. He was like, look, here's a graph paper, here's a pencil, map out our apartment. Just for every step that you take along the wall, that is 1 square on the paper. I was like, cool. And I started doing it, and I was having trouble, and he came over to help me, and he was like, all right, I see what your problem is. See this kitchen wall here? What's on the other side of it? And I was like, bricks? He was like, okay, what's on the other side of the bricks? I'm like, air? And he's like, no. All right, come here. And he took me and walked me around to the other side where there was a hallway. And my mind exploded and I never lived again. Because like, wait, oh my God, the house is connected. There's a different part of the house behind this part of the house. It was a revelation for
when I was a
me.
kid. I had this realization with the toilet, where what was behind the toilet was the other toilet, which like could not have been at less well connected parts of a house. I'd never thought about those things together before.
But it's the kind of thing of getting how things work, and now it's super clear why that's the case, right? Well, we've got all this plumbing, we've got all this toilet plumbing here. Why don't we go ahead and just plug 2 toilets into it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's getting you to think like a plumber.
Well, and more broadly, it's getting you to think of like, why are things put this way? Why is this room here when it could be elsewhere? I love just, and this is I think what school does wrong. And so you said you regretted not taking a bunch of science classes in high school. I had a couple good teachers, but many of them sucked. And I went to I don't know, it was a public school, but it was I think they did a good job as best they could. But like more often than not, like especially in my younger years, like I had teachers that would just tell me to sit down and shut up. But if you mentioned like Socratic inquiry, a lot of them I think took that as like back talk and thought I was trying to make them look dumb. But all I was trying to do was understand stuff. But the thing is, like, if they don't understand it, then they look stupid in front of a 10-year-old, and they don't like that. So but the like getting a picture of, so just to stretch the plumbing analogy, it's like, all right, why is it gives you the framing of asking, why is this the way that it is? And Egan hits that a lot with where did each subject matter or each school subject kind of come from? Why do we teach it this way? What was it before? Not to shove it too hard back towards your review here, but
I think it might be a good idea to get back into the review, though. We are getting a little off track.
I mean, I'm having a great time, but yeah, there's so much good stuff here I want to cover. So
right now we've been talking mostly about children in the age, what is that, 2-year-old to 8-year-old age range, where they're learning new things and discovering the world. And as you point out, or maybe this is Egon, I'm sorry, it really helps to learn them if each year we focus on binaries, because children like that seem to really like binaries, like good versus evil, or have a year where everything kind of rotates around freedom against oppression, binary, those sorts of things each year. And all this is to excite them and make them want to explore these things on their own. Yeah.
It's amazing how deep this idea of what he calls abstract binary opposites, we can just think about as emotional binaries, I think, and get 90% of what he's talking about, how deep this goes. Like, I remember when I got really into, I don't know what to call it, narrative theory or whatever, like why does a good novel work? Why does a good film work? And I'm thinking of like things like Save the Cat and the Story Grid, if you guys know some of those popular books that tell you how to write a screenplay or whatever. And what they all say is that your movie or novel or whatever needs to be about like some basic binary like that. And there can be a couple of them, but there should be one major one. And then at every moment in the plot, you have to be moving the audience like up or down in this danger or safety, or ignorance versus wisdom, or slavery versus freedom. And like this is like the secret sauce of how human minds seem to be able to track something as complex as a modern movie. And if you build that into like how you give a lecture or how you structure like some sort of group project or whatever, like, my goodness, you will find that people who earlier could not hold 10 cents inside of their head, like all of a sudden now can do really impressive things and following along with what you're doing and even like making insights themselves.
Trying to think of a
sorry, there's nothing really to react to there. I apologize. That was maybe a bad podcast. Yes.
Oh, you're definitely. I don't want to say favorite and put anyone else down, but I'm having an outstanding time. No, it's. I think you make a good point, though. It's just I dropped the thread of what I was going to say. Inyash, save me.
Okay, I was going to say that this motivating technique, it seems the goal of it is to give these children so much knowledge, so many things bouncing around in their head, that they move into the next phase of the learning process, which he calls ages 8 to 15, where they start start feeling a desperate need to make sense of all these things and organize them in some way. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Am I reading?
No, he definitely says that. And I think that this is where So Egan like works on this like very Egan says that like the way that we cognitively apprehend the world is through a bunch of these little cultural tools, like stories and like theories and like metaphors and like whatever. And you can like for any one of those, like you can find like a half dozen popular books that are written on like how does this sort of tool work of the mind, right? Like there's like books on like how metaphor works, blah blah blah, whatever. But then on top of that, Egan says that these tools are more than just a smattering of tools, that these tools come from certain like supracultures, not like a specific culture, like, you know, this specific city in ancient Greece or whatever, but like these like larger categories of cultures. And his notion is that the individual human child, in order to like get to the point where they can understand like modern scientific, philosophic, analytical, rational thought, like they have to climb up and bring into themselves these same sorts of cultural, not just tools, but tool kits, these kinds of understanding. And that idea is so weird in the current like intellectual milieu that I ignored it. And I didn't ignore it. I gave up on trying to explain it for years. And the book review was this challenge of, okay, like I'm obligated to try to really say his crazy sounding idea here. So yeah, he does say exactly, Inuyasha, as you just said, that there's this other like stage. There's this other kind of understanding. He actually didn't like the word stage, but whatever, let's just call it a stage. In the middle, which we can think of as like the middle school-ish age, starting from about third or fourth-ish grade and going, well, it never really ends, but like it maybe begins to be, you build something on top of it in high school, late high school. But he does say that. I will say that the easiest way to understand this is to just imagine that there are two of these. He has five. To imagine that there are two of these. There's like the modern rational whatever thought. The word that he comes up with that is philosophic thinking, which is not the worst name ever. And then there is this sort of like much more natural to human beings way of thinking that he calls mythic, which is not maybe as good as philosophic, but okay. That there are the two of these, and that between the two of these, he says, there is another kind of thinking, and you can catch little glimpses of it throughout history, and it looks a lot like the first moments in history when you got something like Geeks, where you see like these flashes in like Herodotus's The Histories, which Egan calls like the Guinness Book of World Records for the ancient world, where like Herodotus is just beside himself to say, and this other weird thing that I've heard about in Egypt is as follows. And you can see that in order to make sense of all of this weird anthropological, quasi-scientific data that he's getting, he, Herodotus here, like resorts to saying like, what is like the biggest, what is the smallest, what is the most violent, what is the most peaceful, what is the most civilized, what is the most, I don't know, whatever, sort of things that we see in all of the world. Let me give you this tour by looking at just those things. You see it also in like the Romantic poets, in the Transcendentalist poets. You see it in the alchemists. You see it as early in the scientific revolution, as the world is becoming modern. And you see it crucially, I think, from our perspectives, in, Stephen, exactly as you were saying before, popular science writing, where people are they're trying to probe these ideas, these like modern scientific ideas, but they're trying to probe them through like the tools that everybody has, story on and so forth. But then like, and they end up adding on this like, almost like Freaks and Geeks sort of, sorry, I've never seen the TV show. This like, what is like the freakiest, weirdest stuff that is going on here? And Egan says, and I mean, I can see what he's saying, and I don't know how far I follow him in this, but it's like, you see that like, if when humanity was young. Wow, what a funny sentence to say. We just kind of apprehended the world in this very like natural way, where it was just like very clear to us exactly what was going on. Right, the gods did this, and the nature spirits did this, and whatever. And then like we started figuring out things about the world, and we realized that the world was a separate entity from us. This sounds like I'm raving. That the world was like the separate entity from us, and it was not built for us. And it was like beyond what we were able to figure out. And it felt like terrific, but also terrible and terrifying. It felt wondrous, but it also, what's the other version of that? It felt awesome, but it also felt awful. And you get this sort of like transcendent, like, ooh, what is going on in the world sort of sense. And then you finally try to bridge these things with these philosophic, modern, rational, theories and ways of quantifying things and counting things and using Bayesian reasoning to figure out things, blah, 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 blah. Now I've ranted for too long. Somebody save me. Iniash, save me. You're our only hope.
Yeah. You haven't ranted too long. I wanted to just, I'll jump in instead, just because I can't help myself. The awe and awfulness of learning that the universe isn't about us. I can't help but think of Carl Sagan's Pale Blue Dot. And I think he says that it's often said that astronomy is a humbling and character building experience. And to learn, and I that was the whole quote I remember, but what he's getting at is that to learn, from our life, and to go back to like how children think of stuff in binaries, like, big and small things, big is bigger than us, small is smaller than us. Just how big things are, and that we're this little small part of it. In a way, that's terrifying and discouraging, but in a way, it's awe-inspiring and magnificent, right? It's kind of just they're two sides of the same coin, but it gets you through this. I'm having difficulty articulating, but that feeling, like you said, the kind of galaxy-brained whoosh feeling, where it's just like, whoa, not to wax too long on it, but it's we're looking at the Pale Blue Dot, and actually, again, the fun narrative behind that, the picture, there's the fun story that he had to argue to get the NASA scientists to turn the probe around and take a picture of Earth after it was passing, I think it was Saturn. And they're like, no, that's art stuff. We're scientists over here. And he's like, this would be really valuable, and we should do it. And apparently it was a battle he had to win to give us that photograph. And you look at that little speck, and on it is everyone everyone you've loved, everyone who's every war fought, everyone who's lived and died, all the heroes and all the villains. Like, it's all there, right? There's something so uniting about that, and it's. I mean, and if this was just taught in school, you'd say, yep, everything happened on Earth. That's where all humans lived, right? To put it uncharitably, right? But to go on for a couple paragraphs about how magnificent that is what really just, I think, like I said, teaches this correctly, right?
Well,
sorry, Nash, what were you going to say?
Here, let me just jump in and respond to that if I can, because there's something like I have teenagers now, or it's something teenager is short for teenager, and my daughter is 11, so I think she's a teenager. Right, like this is like psychologically the sort of thing that teenagers seem to be questing for. They want something bigger than themselves. They want to find heroes that they can believe in. Here, I'll just say that unironically. They want to make sense of the world by like seeing like what are the actual like boundaries of the world, what makes them go woo, and like you can understand how like the propensity for taking substances that make you go woo really ticks up at that stage just developmentally. And one of Egan's notions is that like we can give them that. We have a lot of woo at our disposal. This metaphor that came to me yesterday when I was just thinking about this podcast, here, please give me feedback on this, is that whenever I look at like whenever I look at schools, including oftentimes very good schools, I feel like it's like we discover an island in the Indian Ocean that has real live dinosaurs still alive on it. And this is understood to be amazing. And we get the United Nations like gins up the money to send a group of 25 students to this island with a, well-trained teacher. And there they sit in a room and they read books about dinosaurs and they make models of dinosaurs and they don't go out and see the dinosaurs. And I feel like the way that metaphor can be misunderstood, and that's exactly what's happening in schools. I feel like the way that metaphor can be misunderstood, it would be something like, so we should have the kids go outside and look at nature. Yes, we absolutely should, but it's possible to go outside and look at nature and not have an actual experience with nature. Like the real thing that we want to do is like knit the world, whether it is the world of like the outdoor grass outside or like the world of, like ancient history or future studies or economics or whatever. We want to like connect the excitement of those disciplines with the individual kids who are in our care. And schools don't oftentimes see that as anything close to the main part of their job. It's just fairly outside of the domain of any educational philosophy. And I should know because I've followed a few. And Egan puts that at the center of an education.
Yeah, you mentioned this in the review that kids of this age, they're in love with idealism and extremes, and they really are admiring and wanting to know about heroes, that people that they can look up to and that push on the edges. And they're just absolutely obsessed with gossip, both of, their peers and these heroes in general. And one of the suggestions given is like, start using this love of gossip and heroes to teach them. Like, teach them literally the people in the past who discovered these things. And every single thing that humanity knows was discovered by somebody, and we can tell the stories of that person and how they discovered it and draw people in that way, because that's actually interesting.
And if I can even like piggyback on that, it is really useful. Here I'm speaking particularly scientifically. It's really useful pedagogically to do that, because the people who came up with it, these ideas that we have kids learn first, before they came up with it, they had a stupider way of understanding that thing. And frequently, those worse ways of understanding it are very similar to the ideas that kids have. So when I taught, I'm doing a course right now, a 5-lesson course called Water is Weird. And we start with Democritus and the question of what are things made out of. And earlier I'd like dressed on the very first day of class, I dressed up as Thales, one of the Ionian Greeks, who really kind of kicked off, well, arguably, and people usually think that he did, kicked off modern science by just saying, what are things made of? Like according to the usual story of ancient Greece, like he's the first person to ever ask that question, and to not just like say, it's made of plants are made of plant stuff, and humans are made of human stuff, and raccoons are made of raccoon stuff. But okay, you go back to Democritus and you say, okay, like are there atoms, and like what are atoms like, and are there elements, and what are elements like distinguish those ideas. You get to like go through the true and false intuitions that kids have about what the world is. Because, of course, the truth is that most kids walk around thinking that water is an element, and thinking that fire is an element, and thinking that air is an element. And if you ask them, are these things elements? If they've had a scientific understanding, they'll say no, they're not elements, right? The air is a mix and fire is whatever. But they won't actually be thinking in terms of the science that they learned. So this is a long way of saying that by approaching, especially the scientific and mathematical things, historically, you can correct their bad understandings. I don't want to say they're bad. I mean, in some ways, rather, they're good and healthy, and no understanding is frequently no understanding is actually the perfect one. But you can replace their worse understandings with clearer, better, truer understandings.
I had a teacher once referred to the ancient Greeks as the 3-year-olds of Western civilization, and maybe it would have been more appropriate to say 5 or 8-year-olds. But again, what is stuff made of? How does this work? Why? What is justice? Is this too much, too little? Like the virtues. Is this extreme in the wrong direction or the right direction, or what? And what's fun too about specifically like Democritus is like, he was right, and I don't want to say like by accident, because he deduced his way to like, the way reality close enough to how it actually is. But like you can ask a kid, instead of just telling them again, like stuff is made of atoms. There are like 100 different kinds of atoms, whatever. Like you could just say, hey, I've got this piece of pencil lead. Like, what happens if I cut it in half? Well, I get a smaller piece. What if I keep doing that forever? How far can I go? And then at some point, like, the actual answer is you can't cut a lead. I know that graphite and pencil lead isn't made of lead, but let's pretend it is for the sake of my bad argument or my bad analogy. You can't cut a lead atom in half and have lead afterwards, right?
Yeah.
And
Well,
once you have that understanding, you're like, oh, there is a smallest unit of stuff,
Well, even like if you continued on, right? So the carbon atoms, like you can cut a carbon atom in half, and you get I hope I'm going to get this right out. The 2 lithium atoms, roughly. I've never actually thought about doing this.
I haven't seen the periodic table in a long time.
Yeah, but then you cut those in half. And what do you get? Like, and if you were a god, like, this is a question that I asked students recently, like, okay, like, cut a piece of paper, or tear a piece of paper in half. I had them like count the number of times that they could personally do that for. 15 is pretty good. I can't do it. I can do like 12. But like, okay, like, if you were a god, how many times could you tear it in half? And you can go down to, like, subatomic things. But like, is there an actual end to this? Another kind of role-playing thing that can like really provoke a profound question in a little kid and prepare the way for a lot of exciting learning that's going to come later on in life for them.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's fun exercise too, to have them kind of think about that. And I just think it's useful at some point to realize that at after a certain point, you're not working with paper anymore, right?
Yeah. Like two smaller pieces of paper are the same thing as one big piece of paper, but 2 atoms of lithium are drastically different from 1 atom of carbon. And it's an interesting idea that by cutting a thing in half, you get 2 completely different things that are nothing like their originator.
And working on this lesson with kids made me realize, what is the smallest amount of paper that you can have? It's not actually clear to me that I know the answer to that question.
Oh, because what makes it paper? Like, once it's not usable for writing on, is it even paper anymore? Is it just a splinter of pulp?
It feels wrong to me to say that it is like that there are paper molecules, right? Because paper is made from wood, is made from cells. So maybe like a cell is the smallest amount of paper that you can have.
Paper is a category, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a bad. Yeah, we can use it as a category if we want, but maybe we're pressing the category of paper too far when we do that.
I mean, we're certainly pressing the category of carbon too far if we're working with lithium, right?
Yes.
Well, I mean that because, like, the cool thing is you cut a bunch of carbon in half, and then you get a bunch of lithium and put all that together. You don't get carbon after. You get a bunch of lithium.
One of the fun things for me.
Sorry,
go for it. Oh no, go for it.
I was gonna just tangentially relate to the fact that when you were summarizing how he talks about what adolescents, or I guess middle schoolers like, extremes and gossip, heroes, idealism, and I'm going through that list. I'm like, shoot, check. I also had a favorite tree as a child, and I think I could still climb it today if it's still up. I had Guinness Book of World Records that I probably got around that age in middle school. I had at least 1 year's worth. And that's when I fell in love with superheroes, because heroes are superheroes are the good ones. They're us. They just have one extra ingredient that lets them do things we can't, but like we could still relate to them, And it's like it paints this is less science and more into like maybe social science or something, but it's like it maybe more like moral philosophy, but like what is the right thing to do? Well, if I can do this, then I should be doing, I don't know. The whole hero thing lands really well for me, I guess. But go ahead.
Taking that and then also going back to the book review, which I know that you guys want to do. I'm happy to talk science. Is one of the things that I argued. Well, I don't even arguing is too strong. That I raised in near the end of the book review is that Egan, maybe it feels to me like Egan weirdly well paints the backstory of all of the rationalists that I know. that like he's like point by point nailing a lot of the stories of how we developed intellectually in a way that like did not actually fit particularly well with school. And one of the really good comments that was on that was that, yeah, like you got to be really careful. You're not just tea leaf reading. That you're not just giving a horoscope in this situation. You could describe anything, and a bunch of rationalists would say, my God, that totally describes my story. So I'm curious, Eneasz, to what extent do you see the sort of like, this is what should happen as describing your own development that did happen?
Well, actually, so this is skipping a little bit ahead. So I want to step back a little bit and talk about the philosophic part first, because sure. I am going through a thing right now. In particular, I have been more deeply exposed to the post-rationalist community recently and trying to make sense of it. And I have a lot to say about that slightly later in this episode. But I think that you make a very good point that the philosophic, the third stage that you get to once you get into high school, feels like basically what you are doing when you first discover rationality and start incorporating it into your being. It's as you said, like, or as is written in your review here, that it is trying to map the major features of the world and organize them and make them make sense with grids and systematizing. You start asking really simple, basic questions like, what is stuff? What is society? And then you're trying to find general principles, like what is the one equation that can wrap up all of physics, that kind of thing. Like simple things that tie things together, that are the underlying root causes of things, that make all of this congeal into a single, I don't want to say clockwork, but a single sort of understandable thing. And I think that this is very much what we try to do as we move away from the mythic and romantic and start really trying to systematize and see all the different patterns and connections between things and how those can be understood and manipulated and make us stronger as we gain understanding of those. And that this is what you call it is when you try to think about how high school should be structured, you think about what brings intellectuals joy. And these are all the things that intellectuals love, these smaller, simpler questions that somehow manage to capture absolutely everything above them in a fractal reflection and recapitulation of all the complexity. Is that correct?
That sounds great. Did I write a lot of that?
I mean, I wasn't reading it word for word, but that's what I got out of it.
That was fantastic. Yeah, never better said.
All right. So yeah, in that case, yes, I do think that is very much the rationalist experience, and that is what a lot of us get when we first find Less Wrong, or we first find Slate Star Codex, now Astral Codex 10, this crystallization of things into their deeper essences, which explain things on a more fundamental level that gives rise to all the complexity above. And it's fucking intoxicating.
Well, what I wonder is to what extent, I guess I'm coming at this from the perspective of how educational philosophy or educational psychology usually works, which is to say, children are natural scientists, and they just need to be given these tools of rationality, and then they will. And it's like, yeah, maybe some kids, but I feel like a lot of us go through these very irrational, right, mythic, romantic sort of things where we pile up so much knowledge through these other tools, and then like we're overwhelmed with it, and then we come up with these ways that these theories and whatever, right? We start asking these simple questions, and everything will just start to click like that. Does that? Oh, I'm sorry. No, I was going to ask that question, but you said you wanted to come back to that later. Yes, you have just done a fantastic job of painting the story of the of philosophic thinking. Perfect. Yes.
I like that you point out in this teaching that we should also teach conspiracy theories, because conspiracy theories are another way of addressing these things and explaining them and reducing them to something simpler, but that are wrong. And that it is good. Like people are like, teach conspiracy theories. How could you? But in fact, that it is good to teach these things because everybody should have the experience of trying to reduce something to one of these simpler, more organizing principles, but having been wrong about it and then finding that out.
meta note on that really quick is one of the things that made reading this so riveting and engaging. And I encourage anyone listening to this who's on the fence, because it's a dauntingly long read. Just pick it up and try. Because one of the things that you do that I love is you'll periodically pause and do like Q&A. And so, like Eneasz said, people will be like, "What do you mean teach conspiracy theories?" That was one of the things that made this so fun, because what's going on in our heads. And you're like, well, hold on, what about this? And then you're like, well, let me touch base on that. Then we can get back to this. So anyway, back to what you were saying.
I had a secret way of doing that. That if you want to ask about it, I have advice to give for anybody who wants to win future ACX book review contest. But that's a separate topic. Conspiracy theories.
You know what? We should take your advice and put it as a patron-only content. So if anybody wants to win a future ACX contest, they have to pay us money.
Is it okay? I have it planned lightly for some point in the future to write a Substack post about this. Is it okay that I also do that some number of months from now?
Dude, it's your idea. You can do whatever you want with it.
I don't want to trample on your IP. I think legally everything that I'm saying right now belongs to the two of you now.
Dude, fuck the police.
The conspiracy theories. My apologies. I'm getting over a flu right now. I mean, over government implanted 5G chips in my skin. But I'm carrying out a correspondence right now with Mark Sargent. Do either of you guys know Mark Sargent? He's a flat earther. He's maybe the most well-known flat earther. I watched a really great documentary called Behind the Curve, which is on just the flat earth phenomenon. Mm-hmm. So good. So highly recommended. And
he's in that one?
Yeah, he's like the star of it. And he just came across, to me at least, right? Like I say this as a person who got my most important scientific education as a child was in young Earth creationism. Not that that's right. It's really quite wrong. But because I got into it in middle school and then got out of it in high school and worked through those systems and, really learned I can be wrong. I can be profoundly wrong about something that I thought was very important, but also that there is something I can touch reality. I can touch reality through arguments, listening to the best that both sides have to offer and understanding over time that one entire side can be totally full of crap. And at one point, Scott Alexander wrote something really important, which is that the atheist or skeptic community has overtrained on defeating young Earth creationism because it made them think that most controversial topics are, one side is literally a million times wrong, right? Either the Earth is about 6,000 years old, or it's about 6 billion years old, right? That's a factor of a million between there. It's really difficult to be more wrong about that one way or the other. And ditto flat Earth, but it's so fun now to be engaging with flat earthers and recognizing that what you are doing is you are falling in love with the very beginnings of rationalist reasoning. You are finding these things called arguments, and you can deploy them. and these are the inchoate, just beginning forms of philosophic reasoning. So I love conspiracy, nice, kind conspiracy theory minded people, because I see them as my heroes. They are taking seriously the idea that maybe we're fundamentally wrong about the world, and maybe we can figure out what is true about it in ways that everybody else just rolls their eyes at. They're wrong, right? They're wrong, but they're really enjoyable to engage with.
Yeah.
I think I like that you have a more positive exposure than I do. I think more often than not, I find it frustrating. But I think it's because I tend to. I mean, there's maybe in 50 years it'll be funny, but the conspiracy theories around whatever COVID and the vaccine and stuff, those weren't fun while they were going on. But it is kind of fun seeing how people manage to find a way to believe that the moon landing was faked or something, right?
Yeah.
I think what the difference is, like, that's totally innocuous conspiracy theory. Like, nothing hangs on that. Maybe other than like a distrust in government or something, but there's no real, like, whatever, terrestrial consequences, right? So, but yeah, it's interesting that one person can look at all this evidence and see, but see, that's just more evidence for this other thing that I'm trying to explain to you, right? I think the flat earth theory is actually a great example because, like, I haven't seen the documentary nor engaged with many flat earthers, but I don't think that they take, whatever, the view from an airplane, where you can see some measure of the curvature of the earth or something. They don't take that as evidence for the flat earth. They have to kind of incorporate that into it. I guess there's different kinds of conspiracies, right?
Well, it's really interesting to me how, like, what is a conspiracy theory blends seamlessly. This may be wrong. I think, though, it blends seamlessly into regular science and everything, regular, like, academic understandings of everything. One of the things that I'm going to make a point. I'll make this a good point, and then I'll make it an interesting point also. I think that one of the implications I know that because Egan writes about this, that one of the implications of Egan's ideas about philosophic thinking, which is like the modern academic thinking that he thinks should really be kind of present everywhere at all ages, but really come into its own, like in high school, second half of high school, especially college, is that in order to do it, you need to have different ideas battling it out. You can't do it without that. This is right, like the philosopher and provocateur Peter Boghossian writes movingly of the ancient Athenian virtue of parrhesia, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, of frankness, of open speech, and it is good in the marketplace when you have a marketplace of ideas, because that is the only way that you can figure out things. And I'm gonna really carefully avoid all political things on all sides here. You guys can feel free to say what you want. But like, it is more and more difficult on both sides in the contemporary politicals world to have that kind of open conversations. And I love how Egan says, fine, like, you can in your schools, you can close off conversations to the people who, you know in your heart to be right. It's just that you won't be able to call it education anymore. At least you won't be able to call it philosophic academic education, because that is what that is. And then the fun aspect of this is that when I was so I had this situation where I had to, like, start off the whole, like, 6 years of the science curriculum a few months ago. So I spent a long time thinking, like, what is, like, the one most important point to hit in the very first lesson, because probably more people will view that lesson than any other lesson in the future. And I thought, okay, I think it's the question of, like, how does the scientific method work? And everybody, has, like, it's a hypothesis and blah, 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 blah. No, that doesn't work. No, that's not actually, like, what the historical scientific method is, because, like, ancient Greece had that. Ancient Rome had all of that stuff. The ancient, the Arab, the golden age of the Muslim golden age had that. In the early modern period had that before the scientific revolution really broke out. What the scientific revolution adds in that nobody else had was a total commitment to continuing arguments with people who you knew were wrong. It said that one argument is never going to be a defeater. You are only anyone who says, right, like, checkmate atheists, checkmate theists, right? Like, you are wrong, that you have to stay in the conversation. So I like my other, like, wearing one of my other hats, right? Like, local, I live in Rochester, Minnesota. And one of the things that I've started recently, we're having another one tomorrow, is a twice a month, argument, conversation, drinking, eating club of people who are ideologically, religiously, philosophically very diverse from each other, where we just we pick a topic, we steer into what are the questions that we really disagree most about. And then how do we have really wonderful conversations where we try to get to the bottom of how we are each seeing these things differently. And, like, that is part of what I hope to bring into as I write about what an Egan education can be. On my Substack, I think I'm supposed to plug my Substack. Is that a thing that podcast guests are supposed to?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
very good. The Lost Tools of Learning. That is my Substack. Losttools.substack.com. Is that how Substack addresses work? If that's how they work, that's how this one works.
It is. And I have it open right now. That is what it is.
Okay. Thank you very much for checking.
Check the show notes, everybody.
One of the things that I hope to bring into this is like, what are like the methods that work really well for getting people who otherwise would hate one another to have productive intellectual conversations across divides that are more useful even than ones they could have with people on their side.
All right. I need to read more of your Substack because I have not gotten to that.
Hey, can I just jump in right now and say that I need to read more of yours, Eneasz? I didn't know, from like, I don't know, almost a year of listening a lot to this podcast, maybe I just missed the key ones. I did not know that you had a Substack until I was Google snooping you yesterday. But it is very, very good. I was thinking, I wish I could write as well as you write. You are lucid. You are to the point. You are interested. You're fascinating to read. Also, I like the fiction of yours that I've read too. 100 words, everyone. Everyone, look up Eneasz Brodsky. 100 words. That's a 600-word short story. It is very enjoyable. Reminded me of the parts of Unsong that I've been enjoying the most. Oh my gosh. Wow. Were you inspired by Unsong? By Scott Alexander's story?
Not for that particular story. I've read Unsong, but that story was its own thing.
Weird Kabbalistic-ish angels and American presidents, I think, is the content overlap there. No, sorry, I did not subscribe to your Substack yesterday because I thought it would just look like I was just grubbing for, I don't know, it felt really bad to me. But I will be subscribing to your Substack today.
Well, shit, thank you. I'm very flattered to hear that.
Yeah. What's the URL for it? Death is bad.
Death is bad.
Yeah, that's Substack.com. Show notes, everybody. Look at the show notes.
Yep. What was the 100 words? Was that
100?
All I'm getting is Red Legacy when I Google that.
It appears in Red Legacy. I believe, hold on a second. I'm clicking on the My Fiction page here. Scroll down, 100 words. It is available at, it's available at Curious Fictions and at Archive of Our Own.
Okay, cool.
And at Evil Girlfriend Media. I wonder if either of those are still alive. Evil Girlfriend Media is gone now. Curious Fictions is gone now. But Archive of Our Own is still there, so you can get it there or as part of the printed collection of short stories I put out.
Awesome.
Recommended. If my winnership of the ACX book review contest, if I can actually use that for a second, the winner of the ACX 2023 book review contest recommends officially Eneasz Brodsky's science fiction short stories.
But thank you deeply. And 100 words is literally 605 words. So feel free to read it if you just want a short little taste of something.
Well, for the one word he left out when summarizing Eneasz's writing, fiction and otherwise, is the emotional grip that often comes through.
All right, guys. That's enough about me. We're here for we're here.
All right, we'll get off your back. Hey, tell us about Egan's view of the role of comedy in education.
Oh man, I'm writing that. Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of comedy, and I think that I'm glad that it seems like I wonder if he and I share the same appreciation of it, or if his is different. Because for me, it combines good storytelling, like good pacing, callbacks, etc. It, original observation, wit, and often provokes like thoughtful consideration. Like some of the best comedy sketches aren't the ones that leave, some of the best ones, leave me laughing in tears, but others leave me wondering and thinking this is presented in a way I hadn't thought about. And I'm thinking like Josh Johnson is a comic. You can find 1 million of his videos on YouTube. He does that a lot. But storytelling, best one I got to think of is one of the more recent specials by Mike Birbiglia. It's like an hour. It seems like he's rambling the whole time, like he's just picking it up off the top of his head, but he's not. It's a really long narrative about stuff that's happened. The stuff that comedians talk about, but he tells it like what I have to imagine some of the best campfire orators were like 1,000 years ago, you know? So I'll get off my comedy hobby horse, and I want to hear about yours and Egan's.
I'm writing. Can I just reset the expectations for this? I feel like the last few questions I have just monologued for way the heck too long. So let me just like speak in like smaller chunks, and then like feel free to, because like there's actually so much to say about humor, and I've been thinking a lot about it recently in regards to education. On my Substack, I did a post a few weeks ago, just like trying to do an Egan premortem, right? Imagining like at some point in the future, some person or persons like gets to gin up an actual like, let's try this out Egan school, and then we find out it all went terribly wrong. Like, what the heck could have caused that to happen? And one of the pieces of feedback that I got was somebody saying like, yeah, like you spent too much time on the funnies. Like, humor is great. Humor is wonderful, but like you ruin it by bringing it into school or into education. It's not funny anymore. You're wasting, if it is funny, you're wasting time because it's not really content wise. And like, I feel like, oh man, like I could not disagree more profoundly with this. And so I've been thinking a lot about exactly what that looks like.
One of my, this isn't comedy exactly, but one of my best high school teachers, my chemistry professor, he talked about how every discovery in the history of science started by someone saying, well, that's funny. Why is that happening? What, why did this do that? And it's not exactly ha funny, but it's like, that's a surprise.
That's an Arthur C. Clarke quote. I only know that, or maybe it's an Asimov one. I only know that because my science advisor at Science is Weird recently told me that.
Mr. Waterman, you've ripped off Clarke without telling us.
And now you know the rest of the story. A throwback. Okay, so there's I think at least two sides to this. One of them is that look like the world is really funny. Like, one of the theories as to what makes something funny in the first place is, what's the word for it? Incongruity. When you see two things that don't fit together. And that is like the genesis of things being gut-wrenchingly hilarious. If you set it up.
It's the usurping of expectations.
Yeah.
Like, Dimitri Martin does a lot of like 2-line jokes, and one of them he's like, I've gotten really into people watching lately, mostly just this one woman. And so it's the setting up of an expectation and having that violated, which is in a way the scientific process. There's another element to this, which is another way that we can bring humor into this just naturally, and it helps focus students, and it leads to all sorts of really wonderful things, is by examining like jokes and examining just like things that are funny. I run a course right now. I feel like some large part of my childhood was just spent reading Calvin and Hobbes again and again and again and again, to the point that I basically had them all memorized. And still I find, as an adult, I'll go back and realize all of a sudden, like, oh, I didn't actually understand what that strip meant. Now I do. And so I do this class, that really just takes Egan's idea of, you can find good literature, and good literature doesn't need to be novels. It can be like songs. It can be short poems, and it can be jokes. Calvin and Hobbes is kind of all of those sometimes. So we read Calvin and Hobbes together in the class, and you can learn a lot of vocabulary, a lot of SAT level vocabulary by doing Calvin and Hobbes. But like also like we'll just say frequently like what makes this joke funny. Like I'll have the kids like call attention to the strips that they most want to talk about, the ones they thought were funniest or they thought were weirdest that they don't understand, and then we'll talk about like what the heck is going on here. Now there's an aspect of this which is like what is actually going on like between panel 3 and panel 4. It's not stated. And actually, frequently the kids don't get it at all. And we have to kind of then like figure out, kind of like tease it out. Sometimes there's like different interpretations as to what's going on in this. And sometimes it's just like theory of humor wise, right? Like Aristotle thought that all humor is based on superiority. You're laughing at somebody because you think that they are lesser than you. Freud thought everything was sex, but right, then there's the incongruity theory that we talked about before, and then there's the relief theory. Maybe Freud also thought the relief theory, right? That like you're scared, and then you're like, oh, it's all okay, and so like I had the kids like take different theories as to what makes something funny, and like try to explain like what makes this strip so funny to all of us.
from that perspective. There's a lot of like careful literary theory you can do when you take humor seriously and not a moment before. And then the other element of that Egan talks about with humor is, no, hold on, that's actually so big that let me just like stand back for a second. Any responses to that?
No, keep going.
People have this expectation that school isn't supposed to be funny, you know, and like, that ends up blinding us to, absolutely infuriating. Yeah. The world is funny. Funny is funny. Funny is good.
I mean, yeah. I try to put funny in everything that I do in life when possible. It's just a better way to live.
School. Except for school. I mean, and everyone would make the exception to say like, oh, like if a teacher is a funny person, yes, it can be useful to be funny to get a class's attention. But, nobody else, I think probably somebody out there is looking at like how can we take the humor implicit in our encounter with the world and really tweak that out for all it's worth.
I mean, those people are just, I don't want to say bad and wrong, but they're bad and they're wrong. I think humor should even be incorporated into religious ritual. I think it's an important part of everything.
Eneasz, you're former Jehovah's Witness, is that right?
Yes.
I saw like one little mention of that on one of your Substack posts, and I thought, my goodness, I would love to. I say this as a former evangelical sort of borderline fundamentalist at different points. Is there, you don't need to talk about that right now, but like, is there a place where you talk about this?
I don't know. I'm sure I've mentioned like in passing in various places. I don't know if I've ever really gotten deep into it. I could at some point. Honestly, I legit think we need to have you back for a second episode because I'm not sure how much longer we can go, and there's still so much I want to talk about. But I don't think there's a deep dive into that anywhere. No, why?
I mean, you literally have a really fantastic blog post on how that time you almost joined a cult, but you don't have, but like to find out that you haven't written about like that time you left an actual honest to goodness, everyone in the world agrees it's a cult, is amazing to me. My background is that I look back on my evangelical quasi-fundamentalist Christian upbringing as almost wholly wonderful, which I know is a really rare thing, and I'm interested to know to what extent yours was too. Stephen, are you formerly religious in any way?
Not in any serious way. Like my parents don't know the distinction between belief and belief. I was raised in a vaguely Christian household. I accepted the existence of God the same way I accepted the existence of Japan. Like, it's in this book. You say it's real, I'll take your word for it.
But it doesn't have any practical impact on your life, really.
Well, there actually was some weeks or months in I'd be off by 3 years if I guessed an age, somewhere 11 plus or minus 3 years, where I was terrified I was going to go to hell for blasphemy or something. So at some points it had an impact, but it wasn't like a serious. No, I wasn't raised. We never prayed around the house. Certainly wasn't in a a fundamentalist household or anything like that.
Yeah.
Eneasz, I know that you had said that you wanted to talk about post-rationalism, and it occurs to me that might be like, if you want to have me back, like talking about post-rationalism and like religion, or maybe they're just two separate things. But I would love to, if I come back, I would love to like talk with to get to hear, if you want me to interview you, I would be happy to do that, even to hear your religious story and like how that relates to your development as a rationalist, whether that's just wholly negative or whether they're positive elements or whatever with that.
Oh yeah, I would love to. Jehovah's Witnesses were very big on the philosophic, but maybe we should save that for the actual episode.
Yeah,
because I do want to get into the post-rationalist thing here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and dive into it. So you had the various kinds of understanding and the stages that people go through as they get a lot of knowledge and then try to organize that knowledge and then try to simplify and find underlying themes and structures in that knowledge. And that is where everybody basically starts as a rationalist and starts applying these tools and making themselves much more powerful. But a lot recently, I've been talking with people who are into the post-rationalism, and I don't like the term post-rationalism because to me, it feels like this is just the later stage of rationalism. Like, as you get through rationalism and get all that philosophic understanding deeply ingrained, you come to the later stage where you understand its limitations and where you need to loop in previous methods of thinking to shore it up. I believe, what was it you said here? Okay, here, this is a quote from your review. Philosophic understanding is obsessed with things making sense. Ironic understanding says, reality is always a few steps beyond you. Chesterton's fence is a rationalist shorthand for the idea that we should expect the world to be more complex than our models. And I just threw the term ironic understanding in here. I should have first said that it is the final stage, the final form of Egan's kinds of understanding, which kind of transcends and unifies all the previous forms of understanding, where it's a sense of taking all those other things together and realizing that they're all important and that you can't just have the philosophic that you lean on for everything. There's a lot of important tools from the mythic ways of understanding life and the romantic ways of organizing knowledge and ideals, and all these need to be tied together. And that feels to me a lot like what this argument about post-rationality is about. I feel like most of the people who've been in rationalism for many years come to this place, and they don't necessarily think of themselves as post-rationalists. Some do, some don't. But I think one of the major beefs we have is with people who say they are post-rationalist, but they are people who are entirely into the mythic, or maybe some mythic and romantic, but never went through the philosophic at all. And they're like, look, these are the tools you need to use to synthesize everything. And some of us on the other side are like, yes, we understand that, but also you need the philosophic and you need all these together. You can't just lean entirely on the mythic and the romantic and say that you're a post-rationalist, because you're not post, you're pre. You got to get through the philosophic and rationalist to get to the post part, or as I would think of it, just like the latter stages of rationalism. I don't know. What is your thoughts about the ironic knowledge? And Stephen, go ahead.
I just want to say, I think that maps nicely onto the kind of stages of the kinds of understanding, chart, or I don't know what you call them, pictures in your book review. Elementary, they like stories, binaries, metaphors, jokes. Middle school, extremes, gossip, heroes. High school was, general schemes and certainty and stuff like that. Then I think you've got rationality. Then you've got post-rationality. I think that actually maps pretty well.
I was kicking myself after I hit the submit button at 4:30 in the morning when I uploaded the book review, that I had not mentioned post-rationalism, because it just seemed like, unless I did, and I'm just making up this memory. It's a memory I've had for a while, but it might be wrong too.
I don't recall seeing the word post-rationalism in your post, although, like, you talked about the multi-tentacled transdimensional octopus, which very much feels like a thing out of that idea set.
You talk about some intellectuals, is succumbing to nihilism, or worse still, to snarky, clove-smoking postmodernism. you don't use post-rationalist. After I submitted that, I really became aware of like how big this post-rationalist conversation was becoming. I think before that, I read the piece in the New Atlantis or whatever on post-rationalism, which I really enjoyed. But it just seemed like so clearly the rationalist community is recognizing the limits of rationality, and I'm so much a rationalist, right? I'm not a post-rationalist. I want to be. They seem cool also. They seem like the cool kids. But intellectually, I can recognize that no, like the world was not made for me. Like, what did Yudkowsky say about photons, right? Like we think that, or quantum states, right? Like we think that that electrons or photons are weird because they, whatever, quantum indeterminacy things. No, like, shut up. A photon is perfectly natural. Your mind is weird. It did not evolve to understand this at all. And the things, to get more post-rationalist about it, the things that your mind did evolve to do, which, are
things like stories and metaphors and rituals and things, right? That Egan never talks about rituals. I think he would be worried that that'd be too weird, although I imagine he thought a lot about it and never wrote about it. Like those are the human ways of understanding things for us humans. They're not ways that a horse would come up with. They're not ways that an alien civilization we might find that they share with us, but like they are the human ways. And, Egan, I think, really throws the door open for post-rationality.
Yeah. And he calls it the ironist level of thinking, ironic thinking.
Which I think is it's bad.
I don't like that term either. Yeah.
I worry that we're stuck with it, but if anyone has a better... I've recently heard about from a good friend of mine who is part of the... meta-modernity. Are you guys familiar with this movement, this community?
Mm-mm.
This is a group of people. There's a podcast called I think it's called the Sci-Fi Podcast, which is maybe one of the centers of this conversation, which is looking at less from a personal and epistemological question, but more from a how should society work, right? Like, so we went through these periods where it's obvious that like what we should do is just like choose the person to rule us who God has chosen. Obviously, it'd be stupid to do the opposite of that. And then we went through this, like, well, the rational way of structuring a society is by democracy and whatever. And like through good policy choices, I'm not anti-democratic. I'm really quite pro-democratic. But through good policy and wonky discussions about whatever, and maybe though like and through higher technology, right? But maybe like the better ways of organizing the society are to bring back some of these earlier things. So there's a community of people who are looking at like specifically what can we learn from sci-fi literature about how we can imagine to make better societies, because sci-fi is our shared narrative now. Sorry, maybe that went in a really weird and wonky direction, especially about a community that I'm only beginning to understand. But yeah, I think we see this sort of disquiet with the analytical tools of rationalism and science and philosophy and whatever. We see this disquiet bubbling up in a whole bunch of different ways, and I think that Egan can productively be brought into that, and that like the final vision of what we want to help children become, or at least right, like those of us who are excited about this, is not some sort of dweeb who, like thinks that like computers will necessarily save us and rationality will save us, but a post-dweeb who has been a dweeb, maybe this is maybe the worst possible branding, but like then reconnects with the other aspects of how we live in the world.
Yeah, you pull in a lot of sort of examples of how the ironic style of thinking is important to make everything tie together by saying that irony without the philosophic capabilities, without the rationalism, is impotent. It can't do anything. But philosophic understanding by itself can become anxious about like making every last piece of data fit into a general schema, and irony like lets the philosophic relax a bit. It gives it energy and life.
Egan, and this is getting really like actually so much into the Egan weeds that I'm not sure that I can state him properly here. If I'm remembering correctly, thinks that there is like some kind of like, this seems so much like Marx, frankly, like Marx's different stages of human civilization. And he thinks that like there's some sort of like, there's this Hegelian dialectic that like there's this war between like the patricians and the plebeian class, right? And in the classical world, like that conflict is what like drives like the eventual annulling of that dichotomy and brings us to this different binary. But Egan thinks that there are like these sort of like this pressure that's in each of these sorts of mindsets, these different kinds of understanding, these different toolkits, and that like brings us into the next one. And I don't know if I believe in any of that, if any of that makes sense to me, except for in philosophic. In the modern rational one, where what you're doing is you're trying to make one system to rule them all. You're trying to make an ideology that will answer all of the questions. And eventually you recognize that, or at least you die and you don't recognize this, you die hopeful, or you recognize like, no, it really seems that we're never going to come up with, or this one method, or this method does not and cannot exist. And you can either collapse in despair about that and, a certain president in a certain sci-fi fictional universe that is only 605 words long, I believe, does collapse in terror about this. And then a certain other president, says like, okay, like we have work to do. Let's get on with this. And what Egan says, Stephen, to go back to your point about humor before, is that the best reaction to all of that is just to laugh and to recognize like we may be these insignificant beings who did not evolve to do the work that we are setting out to do. And that's hilarious.
I think what really captured me with this and won me over to the side of ironic thinking a lot was the painting of Socrates as the first ironic thinker, the discoverer of this type of mental stage, and saying that he did laugh. He enjoyed life. He had a lightness to him. Even when he was about to drink the hemlock, he was still being joyful and light. And it says like the payoff of Socrates' irony is freedom from meta narratives, and like the lightness, the ability to float above the fights that others are embroiled in and engaging only where you want is beautiful to me. It is. I think lightness and humor is insanely important.
Oh my God. I just feel like I just had this. Okay. Tell me if this seeming revelation actually explains some of politics, some of our current political moment. In America, the Republican Party is stuck in romantic thinking. And the Democratic Party is stuck in philosophic thinking.
That could very well be. I would have to think a lot more on it.
I feel like I'm at this point in politics where I kind of laugh at the idea that I could be able to, any kind of like political ideology could be able to solve all of our problems, right? And so what I do is like I keep them like pets, inside of my mind, and I set them against one another, and I try to keep some sort of balance that seems wise to this. And Egan, I feel like I'm being okay and going a little bit political right here, only because Egan, in Educated Mind, in a part that I didn't talk about, does actually do the same thing. Yeah, I feel like if we want to understand like why Egan's vision of where we want to help kids get to is useful, we can see the negative images of some of that in the people around us who make us most frustrated.
Yeah. Well, hold on a sec. I am checking the time. How much longer do you have here? Because I knew you had to go soonish.
I am so hungry right now. Right now. So probably I should go.
I feel like we got to have you back if you have the bandwidth for it at some point. I love this conversation, but we didn't talk about the book review as much as I'd have liked to. But the point is, people got a sense of the passion and the connections you can make to stuff. So if you like the conversation, you'll love the book review. And if you didn't like it, you'll like the book review. So I recommend that. But yeah, I would still love to talk to you again if you're available.
Yeah, I would absolutely love to schedule a part 2 where we talk at the very least about the Eganian charter school you went to, how Egan is the Joseph Henrik for education, if Eganization is eating the world, how writing makes us cyborgs, and real quick before you go, can you do the ACX writing advice in a few minutes, or is that for next episode?
Oh, I can do that. Yeah, I can absolutely do that right now.
This section contains patron content for Brandon's advice on how to write an award-winning ASX book review. Back to the regular episode.
Hey, can I ask you guys a really quick question that I've been wondering about for like 6 months now since you guys did that thing on Eric Hole?
Sure.
And this is not about his substance. Don't worry. It won't take any more time. You guys, I realized when I was listening to it that like you guys didn't know, at least you didn't evince any knowledge in that he was the guy who had just recently won the ACX book review contest. For me,
correct. I did not know that.
Yeah. Like for me, the like rationalism like is, Scott's blog and some other things. But my sense is that that's not at all true for a lot of people in the rationalist movement. Am I right about that?
I think pretty much everyone in the rationalist movement knows of Eliezer and Scott because those are the two really big names who put out a lot of content. But I know a number of people who have not read like any of the sequences and who barely read Astral Codex 10, but get it much more like like a cultural Christian knows the things in their religion. They don't go to church, or if they do, it's just like Easter and Christmas, but you still know all the stories. You know about Adam and Eve, you know about Jesus, you know about the flood. And that's just because it's like taken up from the wider culture, from everyone else talking about it, from references you see everywhere. And I think that's how a lot of the modern day rationalists get a lot of their rational knowledge, is through the wider osmosis of sharing ideas and sharing knowledge and sharing occasional really good blog posts here and there, without like a deeper commitment to the entire rat sphere.
So where
what
are
was the
they?
question?
Is this in person in San Diego, or is this like? Sorry, Stephen, go for it. I apologize.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was the question? Like, do I read ASX and Less Wrong like a lot, or I think I got distracted or something?
ACX, which is a telling little mistake right there. But
What did I say? ASX?
not ASX, yeah. Well, is it not this? It seems to not be the center of the rationalist community for you guys.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, so sorry. I want to. My cat's been in here making a fuss. So an adorable fuss, but it pulled my attention, so I missed the punchline of the question. I guess no, not really. The center of it is probably our local community and this podcast.
Oh, wow.
Which, I realized I missed out on stuff. I knew Eric Hole had done something to get him, on podcasts, but I didn't know who he was. I glimpsed at his website and stuff before we did that episode. But I didn't know that he was an ASX reader. I didn't know that he had certainly won a book review contest. I subscribe to the the weekly digest of here's the good less wrong post this week, or excuse me, the highest voted or the best or whatever. But no, I certainly don't commit to reading everything. And sorry, Scott Alexander, I don't read that many. I've read many of his posts, but I certainly didn't read anything like all of them because they're long and I'm a slow reader. So, and a lot of them I can get via, the distillations I get from conversations with people. But some of them you just have to read, Meditations on Moloch, Categories Made for the Man, etc. But yeah, that was my answer.
I've read every post of the sequences. I still try to get the highest ranked posts on Less Wrong when I can.
I also read all
always
the sequences. Yeah.
Yeah. I read all of Astral Codex religiously. A lot of what I get is through the Bayesian Conspiracy Discord, through Rationalist Twitter, through just people that I know mentioning things. There's just so much out there, it's hard to keep up. And honestly, I read all of the book reviews for, in all 3 seasons of it, but you don't know who it is writing at the time. And afterwards, there's a list of a number of names and honorable mentions and all that, and they all just kind of go, they blur together. So I did not realize that he was the winner either. The other major name that I know of now is Svi, because he became so central when COVID happened, and now with his constant AI updates, that he's another one that I know by name. I guess Yassine I really like, and Ayla as well. Both people that I know by name just because I'm so interested in the content that they do put out.
Your guys' Ayla interviews are really great.
Oh, thank you. She's a fascinating person.
To be fair, I've never heard a bad Ayla interview, but I agree. I think that because I wasn't on the one that with Yassine and Ayla last episode, and that was a lot of fun to listen to. They're both.
That's the Yassine. Yeah, that's in my up next, and I haven't listened to it yet.
Oh, you're in for a treat.
I bet. Here, I'm going to go because then we can all go. Goodbye.
Yeah, let's call it.
This has been the high point of my week. Can we schedule another? If you guys would like, by all means, yes,
absolutely.
Let's schedule another one.
Likewise, absolutely. Yeah, this is great. And I will chop the section for patrons where you explain how to win ASX book review contests. So if anyone wants that, check us out on Patreon. Check out all the links in the show notes. And do read this book review. And now I learned it's in audio form. So if you have 3 hours, and which I will today, actually, maybe it'll give me a chance to reread it because I'm going to hit the road and drive for 75 minutes both ways. Check out your book review, The Educated Mind by Brandon Hendrickson. Thanks again for joining us, man. This was awesome.
And also his blog, losttools.substack.com, where he continues to talk about education. And it's not a YouTube channel. Science is Weird. How does one What is the media that is conveyed through?
Live lessons and recorded lessons that people can pay for. So just go to sciencesweird.com. Actually, I have like zillions of things that I've written. Like I wrote the whole website, and there's a lot of
Nice.
piquant, sort of provocative stuff on the website. So I guess I would recommend kicking it around there.
We will
Awesome.
talk about that as well on our next podcast, which we will schedule after we're done here.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks again.
Bye.
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 Stephen, welcome back. We're here for the second part of the show.
Yo.
I've decided to stop trying to estimate how many fractions of the show this is going to be.
No problem, man. I feel like arguing that it has to be some percentage of a Bayesian conspiracy episode or it's not complete is just arguing by definition anyway.
Yeah, that's a silly thing that we shouldn't do.
Right.
Perfect lead-in for the Less Wrong post because it is arguing by definition.
I'll give it a medium lead-in. That wasn't my best work. But
I thought it was a really good lead-in. Honestly, the worst part was that I didn't just roll with it immediately.
I got here a chicken. I'm holding a chicken. It has 2 legs, no feathers.
By the neck or by the legs?
By the legs. Most importantly, it's obviously, by definition, a human.
Oh, why so? Is it because it is featherless?
Right, and bipedal. When I look in the dictionary, that's all that there is.
Well, in that case, I'm afraid that you have to let that chicken go because it is unethical to hold a human by the legs when he's not wearing clothes.
People get mad when you do that with small humans.
Yeah.
I think the last few of these have kind of been the capstone posts of the human definition of language, or human use of words, rather, sequence.
Mhm.
But he points out rather succinctly that when people argue over definitions, they usually start with some visible, known, or at least widely believed set of characteristics. Then they pull out a dictionary, and then they point out that these characteristics fit the definition, and they conclude, well, therefore, by definition, yada, 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 atheism or religion, right?
Yeah, which is kind of besides the point because it's not the visible, known, and widely believed characteristics that are under question. As you were pointing out with the plucked chicken, it would be like saying that Socrates is bipedal and therefore he is vulnerable to hemlock. And if someone were just to say that, like, wait, what do you mean Socrates is bipedal? Like, obviously, that is not under question. But they were saying, well, he's bipedal, and therefore, by definition, he's vulnerable to hemlock. Eliezer goes on to say that, it doesn't even matter if the individual things you're talking about are bipedalism and featherlessness. Like, if you can legitimately see that Socrates is human-shaped, you can predict his vulnerability to hemlock because the universe contains empirical clusters of similar things. If he seems humanish, then the small things that put him into that category aren't really the things that matter. The fact is that he's in that category, and that is what guys are arguing about right now.
Right. And this is the whole point of, like, it's a reasonable probabilistic inference, right?
Yeah.
We talked, I think it was last one, about if an uploaded person should be considered a human being or a person or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of okay sneaking in the connotation of human just because that gives it this magic property where people don't want to kill it.
Yeah. Or hold it upside down while it's naked.
Exactly. But the thing is, I couldn't point to any of the usual things. I couldn't say, well, it's mostly hairless except for its head. It's got 5 fingers, 5 fingers on each of its 2 hands, etc. Because it doesn't have any of those,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It has other things that make it a person.
Yeah, it's those other things that are the things that are under question, really, which is why arguing by definition is so pointless.
Right. That's the thing. If we run into a new tribe of humans that's undiscovered, or a new tribe of featherless bipeds, we can use our ordinary inferences that we use for ourselves and each other, but the point is pointing to a definition isn't the useful thing there, because we have to use a separate set of criterion for assessing whether or not an uploaded person is a human, right?
Yeah. Eliezer points out that if you saw Socrates out in the field with some herbologists and they're preparing an antidote, then you can actually debate whether or not he is vulnerable to hemlock. And if someone keeps insisting he's a human and humans by definition are mortal, then it's kind of like throwing out everything, all the special information you have about Socrates, except the fact that he's human, and insisting like the correct prediction is the one you would use if the only thing you knew about him was that he was human, which is very stupid. He says it's like insisting that a coin is 50% likely to be showing heads or tails because it's a fair coin, even after you've actually looked at the coin and see that it's showing heads.
Right. As he puts that, I liked it. This is illegal under Bayesian probability.
Yeah, you can't just keep one categorization and make estimates based on that while deliberately throwing out everything else you know.
Right.
Yeah, with this newfound tribe of humans, I suppose we could assume that they are humans and make all the inferences that we make about that normally. But if we find out a special thing about them that makes them immune to hemlock, that is something that we should not throw out just because they're humans.
Yeah. Whenever I think of, argument by definition, dictionaries tend to agree, but not on everything. It's reminiscent to me of people like pointing to the Bible and be like, see, this is the proof. But then you grab another version of the Bible and it says something different enough for there to be a substantial argument. For example, the word momentarily. Some people use it to mean for a moment or in a moment.
Yes.
And those are two different things.
That's a good point.
It's like the example that George Carlin, the stand-up comedian, gave was because the word for in a moment is presently. Momentarily means for a moment. And the example he says is that I will be there presently, and then after pausing momentarily, I'm going to kick you in the nuts.
Awesome.
That's how I always remember which one's which.
Okay.
It never comes up in real life because it's not an important thing to debate, but if it was, I'd have a good zinger for it.
That's fantastic. I always remember the Superman does good, you do well distinction.
Right.
But it just, it seems so kind of like weird to have memorized that. I mean, I love that it's a pithy little proverb that's easy to memorize, and now I have it in my head forever. But on the other hand, like, does it matter? Like, everybody knows exactly what you mean when you're saying I'm doing good, or I'll be there momentarily. Like, why the pedantry there?
I mean, I bring this up because it's not entirely tangential, because a lot of the times these arguments are totally pedantic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is atheism religion? Like, if you need to squint at the dictionary to say so, who fucking cares, right? Like another good example is, like, are vegetables healthy? No, they're dead. They're healthful, right?
I guess.
But like,
that is really starting to get to my that would annoy me though if somebody was constantly going on about that.
So it's just one of those things where it's like it doesn't matter right up until it does. And so if people are going to say, well, no, we've got a human is a fertilized egg and sperm, and that's all we care about. Well, then the second, like if that's what's carved into the stone of the law, then the second we have M's, they're going to be non-human things that we can do whatever we want with. That's where the rubber meets the actual road here.
Yeah. It seems that almost all the problems we have with definitions is when a law defines something in a certain way which does not match the way things actually cluster in the world. I guess that's why definitions can matter, because laws are made out of words.
Right. And I think that's an astute point. I mean, that and like just social decorum, social mandate. So it doesn't have to be legally inscribed. It can be socially accepted, right?
Okay, yeah.
And those also have connotations. Again, like I don't know what the legal definition is of Nazi, right? Mm-hmm. But if Nazi is anyone who votes for the party that you don't vote for, then that's a bad definition, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Certainly, if we want to point out, like, what about those guys that worked for that guy Hitler, right?
Right.
There's a reason that like Call of Duty or whatever it was, Modern Warfare, like the zombies games where you'd kill Nazis. There's a reason that it was Nazi is not like Trump voters, right?
Yeah.
It'd be super fucked up if it was just people in MAGA hats, right?
Yes, it would be.
But because it's Nazis who are by definition, worthless scum,
yes.
then it's totally okay.
It's okay. Yeah.
People like to sneak in the connotation there.
Oh, interesting. But correct. Yeah. I like that this post ended on a zinger, which I thought was really fun. Mind if I read it out?
No, please.
It said, you wouldn't feel the need to say Hinduism by definition is a religion because, well, of course Hinduism is a religion. It's not just a religion by definition. It's like an actual religion. Atheism does not resemble the central members of the religion cluster. So if it wasn't for the fact that atheism is a religion by definition, you might go around thinking that atheism wasn't a religion. That's why you've got to crush all opposition by pointing out that atheism is a religion is true by definition, because it isn't true any other way.
I love that. Yeah, the last sentence here is another good zinger here, where he says that you're probably just better off deleting the phrase by definition from your vocabulary, and always, on any occasion where you might be tempted to say it in italics or followed with an exclamation mark. That's a bad idea by definition.
Well done.
I like being reminded that Eliezer is actually really funny.
When he wrote the sequences, man, these were just amazing and pithy and good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, laughing and learning at the same time is, I think the best way to do it.
I agree, which is a thing that we talked about earlier in this episode, I believe. But I don't know for sure because we're recording it tomorrow.
I suspect I bet that'll come up. Well,
Okay.
where do we draw the boundary between this post and the next one?
Let's draw the boundary right here and dive into the next one.
Perfect. Where to draw the boundary?
In this post, I only pulled out a few things in here. The primary thing about this post is that it points out that wondering how to define a word means that you're looking at the problem the wrong way. You're searching for the mysterious essence of what is, in fact, a communication signal. You shouldn't ever have a word and then try to figure out how to define it. It's more about trying to figure out what things out there cluster naturally in thing space and summarize them, like have a handle that you can a mental handle you can use to refer to those clusters of thing space rather than first being given a handle and trying to stick it into things.
Yeah.
Or stick it onto things.
That's got to stay in.
Damn it.
There's not to backtrack, but the opening example is perfect because this is something that at various points everyone's tossed around or at least has heard argued. Like, what is art? Just because there's a word art, and this is me quoting Yudkowsky, doesn't mean that it has a meaning floating out there in the void, which you can discover by finding the right definition. It feels that way, but it is not so. I'm reminded of 30 Rock with Jack Donaghy and Tina Fey. Without the preamble, he's like, we know what art is. It's paintings of horses. Which Ken would agree with, I think.
I was about to say, sounds like a very Ken thing to say.
But yeah, I mean, so this is more about, arguing by definition. Like the point is there aren't, correct me if I'm summarizing if I'm summarizing unfairly here, but it's basically like there aren't boundaries, right? Like rather we make them, but they don't exist out there, right? This is just another way of driving home the point that like what I think Richard Dawkins pointed out that it's only like an evolutionary accident that like the more intermediary species between us and chimps or us and our common ancestor with chimps aren't alive.
Right.
And if they were, we'd have to have like tests as to see who's human. This is like just the funny thing with evolution. Like, where did the first bird come from? Well, like its parents had to be birds, right? Well, yes, pretty much, right? It's like there's no point in the line of evolution if you lined up every ancestor along the way as you're walking back where you could point to this one and the one next to it and say this one's a bird and that one's not.
Yeah.
It has to be arbitrary.
And that's interesting, but also drawing a specific line is arbitrary, and yet things do cluster in thing space. Like you can notice the difference between a velociraptor and a red falcon.
Right.
Like one of them can fly and the other one can't, and that is a thing that is very important about them.
Yeah, at some point as you're walking by the line of ancestors from falcons to dinosaurs, you'll notice, this is different enough from the ones up there. I'm going to go ahead and just say these are different.
Yeah. And there may not be like any one line between a parent and its child, but there's definitely different clusters.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what Eliezer says, that the challenge is figuring out which things are similar to each other, which things are clustered together, and sometimes which things have a common cause. And he says this is a bit of an empirical question. That's basically the entirety of the post as much as I can figure it. I like the example that he used. Do you mind if I drop it here?
I always like it when you read these verbatim, so go nuts.
Okay. He says, if you define electromagnetism to include lightning, include compasses, exclude light, and include Mesmer's animal magnetism, what we now call hypnosis, then you will have some trouble asking, how does electromagnetism work? And I skip ahead a little bit. We could say that electromagnetism is a wrong word, a boundary in thing space that loops around and swerves through the clusters, a cut that fails to carve reality along its natural joints. And I don't remember if this is a post which introduced this concept, but the concept of carving reality at the joints when we use language has become pretty big in rationalist space since these sequences were written. And it is this particular idea that some things do cluster together, like light and magnetism and lightning, and some things, like hypnosis, do not. And having words that correctly will group the like things together and not the unlike things together can be both a challenge and something that helps us when we're trying to make sense of the world. Like asking how does electromagnetism work is a very difficult question if you include hypnosis.
Right. And exclude light.
Yeah.
I can't remember. You're right. If this is the phrase, if this is one that introduces that phrase, but it has worked its way into the nomenclature. I know I heard this phrase on a podcast at some point in the last 2 weeks.
Nice.
Win-Win versus Moloch, the many-headed monster that may consume us all, with Liv Boeree. I think that's how you say her last name. I remembered I heard a conversation with her on Lex Friedman's podcast like a year or so ago. But I think on this one, she said something about carving reality at the joints. To me, that's like a signal of like, oh, okay, she's read the sequences or she's sufficiently involved in the community that this is seeped in, right?
Yeah. That's the name of the podcast?
That's the name of the episode. It's on Clearer Thinking is the podcast.
Oh, okay. Cool. Well, I am subscribed to Clearer Thinking. I will go download that one.
It was fun. We'll put a link in the description here.
Hell yes. Did you have anything else to say about drawing a boundary?
I mean, I like his closers usually. He says that, you can't hide behind a comforting shield of correct by definition. Both extensional definitions and intentional definitions can be wrong, can fail to carve reality at the joints. Categorizing is a guessing endeavor in which you can make mistakes, so it's wise to be able to admit it from a theoretical standpoint that your definition guesses can be mistaken. Again, if this is one of those things where if you've got some stupid definition of human, then the second an edge case comes up, you're going to be just trapped into this ridiculous circumstance, whether it's believing that a miscarriage is equivalent to a murder or that an M it has no moral value, right?
Mm-hmm. And by M, that's an emulated human.
Yes, thank you. I jargon dropped without explaining.
Yeah, I'm sure most people are familiar, but it's been a while since we talked about them, so maybe the new listeners wouldn't be.
Nope, valuable. Quick lower quality audio note here to mention that we forgot to plug the next two Les Wrong posts that we're reading called Super Exponential Concept Space and Simple Words and Leave a Line of Retreat. Speaking of valuable, we've got two valuable things to mention before we sign off.
Hell yes, we do. The first one is the Guild of the Rose, which is a very valuable organization that exists both in reality and in cyberspace, which are two different places that have a boundary between them. I'm sorry. I apologize.
I'm not going to apologize for this. Not to put too much punnery into this, but I think by definition, they are the group in the world that's doing the most concerted effort to hone rationality skills. Like one of the main weaknesses of CFAR was that, you'd fly out to the Bay Area for 3 weeks and you had to be basically rich to do it, right? It cost a bucket of money and you had to be able to afford that time off work. Not like I'm not putting down what they did. It was great, but that was a huge weakness. And I think they haven't officially closed up shop, but they've pivoted. Anyway, if you want to actually practice your rationality skills, there's a real place you could do it. The Guild of the Rose. Get better, get smarter, make wiser decisions, win more often.
They've been operating for many years now. I think they started around COVID times. So going on more than 3 years now. They have an online community where everybody supports each other and helps each other learn things. And they have quite a few courses that you can take for free. Like you said, help you become more rational and flex your rationalist muscles, learn new rational skills, or even just get better at the things you want to be rational about.
Exactly. Who doesn't want to win more often?
One can find the Guild of the Rose at guildoftheRose.org and a link in the show notes as always.
Right on. And someone else who's already winning at life is the patron we got to thank this week.
This week, we would like to thank our patron, Faze Abbas, for helping to bring this show to you. Faze, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, pretty new contributor to the Discord. I remember seeing this name popping up just recently a fair bit more. I'm assuming been a lurker for a little while, certainly been a patron for quite a few months now. Welcome to the Discord community, and thank you so much for supporting us. This means a lot and helps us keep all this thing coming, and helps us to continue educating the people who wish to listen to us about education or other topics. See, I'm tying this into the thing that we talked about earlier, which we haven't talked about yet.
You did it so well that I wanted to add something, but I guess I can just say, yeah, what Inyash said. No, thank you, Faze. It makes a world of difference, and we appreciate it. As always, you can find us on Patreon. We're always happy to accept the support, pay the bills here. Like and review us. That certainly helps too on your podcaster of choice. And just a reminder to all of our patrons and potential patrons and past patrons, our reward tiers we never really did anything with them. So no, we didn't. Anything we can help with, or any reasonable request, we're absolutely willing to entertain. We've received requests to do a couple episodes on stuff that we're just not experts on and wouldn't really, I think, have unless we're going to become scholars in that field, wouldn't really be handy. But we're open to hearing anything and want to do whatever we can for you to repay the favors. So thanks for listening. It's always this is always fun to do. I hope you guys have fun listening, and we'll see you guys back here in a couple weeks.
Hell yeah. Peace out. Thank you, Steven.
You bet. See ya.